right. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. This is David Patrick Harry with Church of the Eternal Logos, and we have a very special stream this evening. A very special shout out is due to Anthony DeSanto for sponsoring tonight's stream. Thank you very much, Anthony. He requested that we talk about this book right here, Christ the Eternal Tao, with an emphasis on the relationship between Western Logos theology and Eastern the Eastern tradition of Taoism. And so that's what we're going to be diving into today. Now, some of you guys know I have already done a video on this book, of which I basically just kind of read through aspects of the book. And what I'm going to do in this stream is focus more on the sort of theological elements that both connect Orthodox Christianity and Taoism. And so I'll be reading from this book again, but sections I did not read from in the previous stream. Again, our focus here is going to be looking at aspects of unique dimensions of Orthodox Christian theology and seeing how then they are represented and understood within Taoism, as opposed to just a sort of general overview of the book Christ the Eternal Tao. So that is our plan for this evening, and we got a lot to dive into, a lot of reading materials. Some of you already, I saw in the live chat, already hint at this book right here by Martin Palmer, the Jesus Sutras, Rediscovering the Lost Religion of Taoist Christianity. And so as you can see, I got a few tags here that I would also like to read a little bit of the attempt by Taoist, the sort of fusion of Taoist understandings within the Tang Dynasty. We're talking between the 7th century China up into roughly the 10th century when that dynasty falls apart, and later then the Song Dynasty comes. But the Tang Dynasty is one of these Chinese dynasties that actually made Taoism its sort of official religion. And so it's interesting to note that it's during the Tang Dynasty that we see the entrance of the Assyrian Church of the East, the Christian church, again, that has a different Nestorian Christology. However, its entrance into the Chinese Empire, the Tang Dynasty at the time, was warmly welcomed by the emperor. And so it was referred to as the religion of light. And so we're going to get into some of that, and I thought that would be a good capstone today's stream, is once we get through Hieromonk Damascene's book, Christ the Eternal Tao, and look at some of these theological relationships. For example, being, as we'll note, that Taoism is an incredibly apophatic theological and philosophical tradition. It's focused on the sort of negation of its understanding to highlight the transcendence of the Tao. And we'll get into and explain what the Tao is and some important concepts and terminologies, words to understand Taoism. But we can, one of the points that I'll be making is apophaticism, the sort of mystical dimension. This is why Orthodox Christianity is referred to as a sort of mystical church, is the emphasis on our apophatic theology. We can also note the emphasis of Taoism in regards to simplicity and the detachment from desires of the world. Also something indicative of Orthodox Christian theology. The quest for immortality and divinization is clearly going to be tied to our understanding, our doctrine of theosis, engaging with God's uncreated energies. And in fact, we see references to the uncreated light within Taoism, which we'll be hinting at, and it's going to be, again, elicited in this book right here. So we can also see the centrality of 1 and 3. You know, how many are aware that Taoism talks about the, that the Tao gives birth to the 1, which gives birth to the 2, which then gives birth to the 3. And so all things come from the 3, and the 3 come from the 1. Well, again, we're not Taoists here. We're not going to be arguing for Taoism, but we can certainly already highlight a general presuppositional connection to, again, how we would understand the Trinity and our understanding of the Godhead. So we'll be noting that. And then the noetic abilities of the heart. I think this is another very interesting dimension that connects Taoism to Orthodoxy, right? Even within Christianity proper, we can look at Western Christianity and they're not going to have the same doctrine of the nous and the understanding of the noetic capabilities of the heart or the eye of the soul, where we'll see some of that being emphasized here in the book, Christ the Eternal Tao. So that's some of the stuff we'll be getting into. But before we get into reading and going over some of the books here, or some of the chapters in this book that I want to read to you guys, let's go over a quick overview. So again, starting as if you guys don't know anything about this topic, we're going to give a sort of introductory overview. First and foremost, I need to make a rant, and that rant is in regards to the spelling of Taoism. I absolutely hate the spelling of Tao with the T, or what is referred to as, or Taoism with the T, which I did for the title of today's stream, because that is the title technically of the book. However, why is it with a T and sometimes you see it with a D? That is the difference in pinyin in the Wade-Giles system of Chinese pronunciation for attempt to sort of Romanize Chinese characters. They came up with Wade-Giles. This is in the end of the 19th century and moving into the 20th century. They have their own style, and that's where you see like Laozi, which is L-A-O if you're going to use pinyin, but then when the Wade-Giles, it should be, in pinyin, it's L-A-O-Z-I, the teacher, Z-I, Laozi. But with the Wade-Giles system, you'll see L-A-O and then T-S-Z-U or T-Z-U. I absolutely hate the Wade-Giles system. And so Taoism is pronounced in English like it has a D. It's Tao. It is Tao. Taoism. Now, I understand that it's spelled with T, and this is, again, if you look up like the Stanford Encyclopedia, it's going to spell it correctly based on the contemporary pinyin. And pinyin is different from Wade-Giles in the sense that Wade-Giles is a system that was developed, as I said, by Westerners in the end of the 19th century, whereas pinyin was developed in the later half of the 20th century by Chinese linguists. And so when I studied Chinese, when I studied Mandarin and went to China, we use pinyin, and pinyin is so much easier and clearer to understand how certain words are pronounced. So I just wanted to lay that out there because I know so many people, when they see me, I will always write Tao with a D, Taoism with a D, because that's how it's pronounced in pinyin. And so Tao De Jing, right? If you look at the Wade-Giles, it's like Tao Te Ching. No, that's not how you pronounce it in Chinese. It's Dao De Jing. And so if you look at the pinyin, it's D-A-O-D-E-J-I-N-G, Dao De Jing. That is actually how you pronounce it. So just FYI, that is the introduction here. So when you start to understand how these different things are spelt, pinyin and the Wade-Giles system are two systems that have been developed really over the last 100 years in regards to how you phoneticize Chinese characters. And so I absolutely privilege the pinyin over the Wade-Giles. So I wanted to throw that out there. Okay. Now let's get into the actual topic. So Taoism. We're going to be focusing on Taoism. And one of the reasons why this topic, again, major shout out to Anthony DeSanto for sponsoring today's stream. Thank you very much, brother, for choosing this topic and supporting the stream here. The reason why Taoism is so interesting to me is that when I fell away from my Protestant faith, some of you guys know my journey, that when I got into my undergraduate studies and took a class on the quote-unquote the Bible and got interested in the sort of scholastic approaches to scripture and criticism and all this different stuff, it sort of shook my very naive Methodist faith that I grew up in. And that led me to taking a class on world religions, which led me into becoming very interested in Taoism, Eastern mysticism, martial arts, that type of thing. So Taoism was a tradition that I clinged on to quite quickly after I sort of fell away from Christianity. And so this book is also based on the works and life of Father Seraphim Rose. Not that he wrote this book, but Hieromonk Damascene, who did write this book, was a student of Father Seraphim Rose. And Father Seraphim Rose got interested in Taoism from his very brief tutor or teacher, Alan Watts. So we all know who Alan Watts is, or at least most of us probably know who Alan Watts is. And so Alan Watts was briefly a teacher of Father Seraphim Rose, and there was this Asian studies, East Asian studies sort of I don't want to call it a school. Maybe you could call it a school. It was in San Francisco. This was during the 60s this got started. And Alan Watts was also obviously briefly a teacher there, but so was a Chinese gentleman that helped Father Seraphim Rose learn Mandarin. And so that's what then got him interested in looking into Taoism and seeing the relationship between the Tao and the Logos, the Tao and the Logos. Now, this was actually before Father Seraphim Rose became an Orthodox monk. Now, eventually, he's going to become an Orthodox monk, as we know, and that's why he's beloved, and we love Father Seraphim Rose. So, I think it's so interesting that, and his teacher was Jiming Xian. Jiming Xian was a teacher at that Asian Studies Center in San Francisco, and he was teaching people basically how to read Chinese characters and stuff. Again, Alan Watts was also a teacher at this center, but Father Seraphim Rose grew a sort of fond relationship with Jiming Xian, and he eventually became his sort of private tutor, and this led into Father Seraphim Rose reading the Tao Te Ching in Chinese, which then eventually led to him connecting the sort of presuppositions of Taoism with Eastern Orthodox Christianity, again, of which he becomes later a monk of. So that's kind of the impetus for this book, is that it's actually is based off the early research of Father Seraphim Rose that then is picked up and further developed by his student, Higher Monk Damascene. And now we also need to make a point that this book is not about syncretism, right? So we're not here to say that all religions lead to the same place, that all religions have equal truth, that Taoism and Christianity is basically the same thing. That's not the point of this book, and that's not the point of this stream. Obviously, we have a doctrine, and this is going to be incredibly important for how we approach these sort of truths that exist within pagan religions and pagan systems. This is, as even is referenced in this book, is St. Justin Martyr, but the term that they don't use in the introduction is Logospermaticos. Logospermaticos, as you heard me talk about over and over and over, is a term developed by St. Justin Martyr talking about the truth that existed in his specific context, the Greek philosophers, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, and how because they were led by logos, they were led by reason, they were led by this organizing principle, and then us as Christians, which is obviously the second person of the Trinity. This is who Jesus Christ is. He is the Logos. That, well, they were led by the Logos before the incarnation, so in a way they're kind of doing the best they could. And so Logospermaticos, seeds of Logos, seeds of truth, seeds of the ultimate fulfillment can be found in all places. What's so interesting is that a naturalistic philosophy / religion like Taoism, meaning that it's coming to its conclusions by observing nature. This is not a revelatory tradition. Different from Islam, different from Christianity, different from even Hinduism. Remember, we're doing our introduction to world religions, and part of Hinduism and some of the Rig Veda and stuff is that these are revealed texts. These are revealed knowledge from the divine. Taoism doesn't go that far to make those claims. It is an understanding of the principle of Tao, the path, the way, by observing the way of nature. And then this observation, this sort of coming to one sort of natural state, pulling away your desires from the world, contemplating, this is how you become to see the Tao. In a way, how we come to see God through our own morality and our pulling back from the sort of lures, the temptations of the world itself. And so Taoism also would point in that direction. Now, Taoism emerges in the 4th century BC. This is the axial age, right? This is the beginning of the axial age, this age where we get all these religious people. We get Laozi, we get Confucius, we get the Buddha, we get Jesus Christ, all within about a 400-500 year period. And so many of the world's religions have some root back into the axial age. But Taoism emerges in the 4th century BC And it emerges from a school that already existed within Chinese culture. This is during the Warring States period. Again, I don't expect you to know the history of the Chinese empires and emperors and all that different stuff, but the Warring States period is one of the earlier stages in sort of recorded Chinese history. And we see what's called the School of the Naturalists. They already were developing these ideas regarding yin and yang and the 5 elements. So the 5 elements being metal, wood, fire, wind, and water within Chinese understanding, and that they are constantly overcoming each other in this process, this cyclical understanding, because within a Taoist understanding, the universe itself is cyclical, it is eternal. So it doesn't, in a way, doesn't have the same creationist understanding that we would, having a sort of personal deity, because the Tao, as we'll see, is not a personal entity. Now, it referred to it sometimes as a being, but it doesn't have a personality. You're not praying to the Tao. What you're doing is using your will in Taoism to align yourself with the cosmic will, the Tao. And it is a sort of cosmic will, but it's not personal within a Taoist context. But we can also relate to that, right? We as Christians are trying to align our free will with the will of God, which we know through the Logos, through Jesus Christ. And so in a way, we can see a direct relationship with there as well in regards to how the Taoists and also how the Christians understand the use of will. Will is not to be used, to be constantly manifested, right? This is what we would see as a sort of magical worldview, where the goal is to manifest one's will, to manifest one's desires. That is a very magical understanding of will. Thelema obviously being the fulfillment of that sort of magical tradition by Aleister Crowley. But Taoism doesn't fall necessarily in that direction. The idea is to align your will with the Tao itself, cosmic will. So there we can find another sort of subtle connection that is very big in regard to your presuppositions, right? I mean, having a magical worldview where it's all about manifesting your own will versus you having a worldview where you have a free will, but you have to align it to the cosmic will, because if you don't, it's ultimately going to lead to self-destruction. Very similar to our Christian worldview, and one that separates other paradigms. So it emerges in the 4th century from the school of the naturalists. As I said, the elements that Taoism builds upon from the school of the naturalists is the development of the concept of yin and yang and the 5 elements. Now, yin and yang, I know you guys have heard of. You see the symbol there in the thumbnail today. The yin and yang, yin is the feminine principle. That is the dark principle. Yin is often referred to as the sort of north-facing side of the mountain. And it is dark, it is cold, it is wet, and it is feminine. The yin is dark, cold, wet, feminine. The yang is the masculine principle. That is the south side or the southern face of the mountain. And that is bright, warm, dry, and masculine. And so the Chinese, again, developing this concept, not developed by Taoists, developed back in the school of the naturalists, predating Taoism, they developed that concept, this idea that sort of opposites are necessitating each other and blending into each other to create a sort of holistic harmony. Taoism is all about harmony with the Tao, which again, we can relate to because our worldview is all about harmony with God's will. And so again, same thing that I'm already trying to talk about, very similar understanding there. So what are the unique elements then when Taoism emerges out of the school of the naturalists? Well, a few of the elements are philosophical Taoism. So Taoism takes on a sort of philosophical element in regards to bigger ontological questions, looking at the world, nature, how we relate to it. And so we see things like the Tao Te Ching. We see things like the Zhuangzi. The Zhuangzi is another famous Taoist book written by, obviously, its author, named after Zhuangzi. He has the famous, for example, the Butterfly's Dream is a famous little poem by Zhuangzi. So you have the Tao Te Ching, that is believed to be written by Laozi, the great teacher. Then you have Zhuangzi, the Zhuangzi written by, believed, Zhuangzi. And then you have something like the I Ching, which is a sort of divinatory book regarding, it's often referred to as the Book of Changes, right? So because the Chinese understanding, again, these understandings of yin and yang, an eternal cosmos, constantly changing, again, we're going to be hinting at Heraclitus here in a few, the world is constantly changing. It's therefore we need to decipher the book of divination, the I Ching, then deciphers a sort of understanding of the changes of the cosmos, the changes of time itself. So this is the development of philosophical Taoism's one element that separates Taoism from the school of the naturalists. The next one is the techniques for achieving ecstasy. Techniques for achieving ecstasy. So we could say a sort of mystical emphasis. An emphasis on sort of mystical experience is another unique dimension about Taoism compared to its predecessors. And then the practices of achieving longevity and immortality. Now, we all know about the Taoist alchemists, right? Trying to achieve immortality through the elixir of life or whatever it may be. But this inclination to attain an eternal life, I think, the authors here, the Orthodox Christians related all this, would say this is a presupposition or an inclination towards the revelation and the purpose of Christ himself. He offers us that immortality. He offers us that divinization through theosis, through the engaging of his uncreated energies. And that is the point of the Eastern Orthodox Church, not talking about Western Christianity, Catholicism, Protestantism, evangelicism, different emphasis to a degree. Ours is about theosis, divinization by the grace of God, by participating in his uncreated energies, because our Godhead has what's called the energy essence distinction, different from Western Christianity, and really different from any other world religion, including Taoism. So we have the unique elements, philosophical Taoism, techniques for achieving ecstasy, the sort of mystical emphasis on Taoism. Then you have the practices of achieving longevity and immortality. And then you have the development of exorcism. So what's interesting about Taoism is we see the beginning of the practice of exorcism in regards to evil spirits, good spirits. So Taoism does recognize a sort of pantheon of spirits that are then divided between those that are fulfilling the will of the Tao and those who are sort of contrary to Tao and those that cause, in a way, self-destruction. And so the process of exorcism, which obviously we are Christians, we believe in exorcism. Taoism, that was a unique feature in the development of Taoism, again, from the school of the naturalists. Guys, please hit that like for everybody who's here. And if you would like to support this stream, send in a super chat using the Streamlabs link. I'll get to all those super chats at the end of the stream. And so after those unique aspects, Taoism was the development of a sort of higher philosophical thought on the cosmos and life, and it amalgamated with the Wu. This is the shamanic culture of northern China, right? So again, Taoism doesn't exist yet. Obviously, shamanism does. Shamans dealing with these spirits, mastering, having dominion over these spirits. Shamanic Chinese shamanism, particularly northern China. Again, you have to realize there's an ecological divide, cultural divide, at one time a linguistic divide between Cantonese and Mandarin, between northern China and southern China. And so in northern China, you had the shamanic culture, the Wu, which again is blended into Taoism. And then you have the Fang Shi, the technical specialist. What I mean by technical specialist is an astrologer, a divinizer, a magician, a shaman, an exorcist. Taoism allowed for these, again, sort of incorporated the Fang Shi, these technical specialists. And so you could be a technical specialist regarding astrology because, again, from their perspective, the universe, the cosmos, run by the will of the Tao. If we can decipher the stars, we can decipher the will of the Tao, and then we can align ourselves better with it. That was their understanding. So the first official organized Taoist tradition, okay, is regarded to as the way of the celestial masters. The way of the celestial masters. And this was officially recognized by COTEL in 215 AD. So as we said, Taoism, we say, begins in the 4th century BC. We're talking the 300s BC. It isn't until the 200s AD that it becomes the official religion of a sort of empire, a Chinese empire, Chinese dynasty. The first one is COTEL in 215. This eventually falls away. Taoism, not the official. Again, that particular dynasty falls apart. And then the Tang dynasty comes into power. And the Tang dynasty is really a very prominent dynasty within Chinese history, very successful. This is the time, again, we're talking from the 600s basically to the end of the 900s, that the Tangs ruled China. Eventually comes the Song dynasty, but during the Tang dynasty, we see, again, you had the Silk Road at the time. This is when the Zoroastrians, the Chinese, eventually the Muslims, they all make their way into China via the Silk Road into Chang'an, which was the capital of the Tang dynasty. Modern day Xi'an is the Western Gate, actually, is the translation of Xi'an. So Chang'an was the capital at that time, and it was in not modern day Xi'an. So the Tang dynasty is what we're going to be referring back to then when we read some of these sutras, some of these quote unquote Jesus sutras, this blending of Nestorian Eastern Christianity with Taoism. That's what's unique about this book and about the Tang dynasty, because eventually the Tangs, they're going to lose their power, and you're going to have what's called the Guangzhou Massacre. Now, when I went and studied in China, I studied in Guangzhou. Guangzhou is in southern China. It's very warm there. It's sort of a tropical climate, and it's a great trade hub. Still is. Arguably one of the biggest in China, because it's through, again, the sort of rivers near Hong Kong that you can then sail into in mainland China and get into Guangzhou. That Zhongshan Dashui, Zhongshan, Sun Yat-sen, he was one of the first to use Western medicine, and that's the university I studied at, again, in Guangzhou. Guangzhou is a multicultural hub due to trade and its access to waterways and the ocean. Still is a major trade route. And so the Guangzhou Massacre, you can look that up, was a time in which they killed a lot of these foreigners that were there for trade, including the Christians, including the Zoroastrians, including a lot of these different religious traditions. And so it really isn't later until like the 14th century that kind of Christianity makes its reappearance in China. So just FYI. And we're going to talk a little bit more, if we get time, at the end of the stream in regards to the Tang dynasty and some of the Jesus Sutras. Now, a few of the words, the grammar that I want us to be familiar with, just so we can understand Taoism before we dive into this book, is obviously the Tao. That's a big one. And so the Tao, as I said, is it's the way. If you're going to translate it, you could translate it as the way. It's usually translated as the way, the path. And it is the very ground of all being. I think that's the best way to describe it. It is the metaphysical basis of reality itself, which is exactly how we understand the Logos. The Logos is the metaphysical basis of reality itself. It's what gives order and pattern to all things. All things exist due to the will of God, due to the Logos providing that opportunity. So we can see a relationship right there from the general concept, although Tao is very abstract, right? It has no personal relationship, whereas the Logos, Jesus Christ, absolutely does. So that's one thing. However, one of the similarities is for the Tao is both immanent and transcendent. The Tao, being the ground of all being, is both transcendent, but also it's right here, right? Because they believed in this natural philosophy, this natural theology observing nature, so they could see the Tao present. And so that is a virtue of the Tao that, again, other religions may not have about, quote unquote, the sort of deity or their understandings of divinity. You know, again, even deism, right? This is a later Christian idea developed around the time of the Enlightenment. God is a clockwork maker, right? He sets it in motion, then he steps away. That is not how the Chinese understand the Tao. The Tao, though non-personal, is both immanent and transcendent. A next word that we need to know is D-E, is the Chinese word for virtue that is used within Taoism. Okay, and so is the concrete manifestation of the Tao. So this is another little place in which we can see a connection back to Christianity. Is the concrete manifestation of the Tao. And the goal is to align yourself with the and to embody right? To embody the virtues. And that the virtues are the manifestation of the Tao. We could see that also with our uncreated energies of God or Christian virtues, generally speaking. Those virtues come from God. Those uncreated energies come from God, and they are then manifested in the world through us by choosing to do that. And that is again, a sort of manifestation of the Tao for these Chinese. Now, another term that we need to know is Tian. Tian, T-I-A-N. Tian is heaven, generally translated as heaven. So another way to understand that is that Tian is the conscious divine will that regulates the cosmos. Okay, it is the conscious divine will that regulates the cosmos. Again, it's just a term to refer to an aspect of the Tao. So Tian, heaven, generally translated, is also better understood as the conscious divine will that regulates the cosmos. Then you have a term Shen, S-H-E-N, Shen, gods and deities, or generally benevolent spirits. And so again, as I said, in Taoism, there's benevolent spirits and there's evil spirits, and it has to do with the relationship to the manifestation of Tao and again, Tian, the cosmic will, the cosmic will. Then you have Neidan. Neidan, N-E-I-D-A-N, is another term of interest, and that is the internal alchemy to attain immortality through, this is within Taoism, meditation, breath control, gymnastics, massage, diet. These are ways of a sort of internal alchemy that one can work on for the attaining of immortality and sort of ultimate realization. And that is also tied with, that is again Neidan, N-E-I-D-A-N, and that is tied with another concept, which is the external alchemy. That is Waidan, W-A-I-D-A-N, Waidan. It's the external alchemy to attain immortality through the refining of pills, herbs, plants, and minerals. And that's generally what we would think of in regards to sort of Western alchemy, or the alchemical process of distillation and amalgamation and consolidation, all these different alchemical terms in regards to the purifying of the sort of the detritus of the world and creating, again, a sort of gold out of lead, right? So Waidan is another form. So there's two forms of alchemy within Taoism. There's Neidan, the internal alchemy. Then there's Waidan, the external alchemy. Both are ways, or believed to be processes, for the attainment of immortality. What I think, again, in regards to Christianity, because that is what our sponsor of today's stream. Again, special thank you to Anthony DeSanto. He was interested in, again, the overlapping of theology. That's why I'm focusing on some of these terms, because I think the internal alchemy, obviously we wouldn't use those words, but meditation, breath control, the hesychastic tradition, gymnastics, having a strong body, diet. These are things that we find in our own tradition that are a sort of purification of ourselves, right? And that's exactly how the Taoists understood it. And then in regards to Waidan, the external alchemy, it's all tied to ingesting something to attain immortality. And I couldn't help but think it seems like a sort of precursor to the Eucharist, right? That they're trying to refine these plants and these herbs and these minerals so that they can, again, eternally unify again with the Tao to some degree. Well, isn't that what we do with the Eucharist? And isn't the Eucharist an interesting sort of full manifestation of the Waidan process of Taoism? I don't know. I'll leave that there for you guys to think about, but certainly interesting nonetheless. And then we have Wu Wei. Some of you who are familiar with Taoism definitely have heard the term Wu Wei. Wu Wei is action without intention, or action without action, as sometimes it's said, actionless action. And so Wu Wei, a way to understand Wu Wei is, you guys have probably heard Bruce Lee talk about being like water. And that's a perfect example of what this Wu Wei concept really means. actionless action. Bruce Lee talks about be like water. You put the water in a cup and it becomes the cup, right? You put water in a pot, it becomes the pot. What does he mean by that? Water, without its own action, by its own sort of nature, takes on the shape of the thing, the container that it's in, right? And so this is a sort of actionless action. This is, again, this concept of, for Tai Chi and even Chinese martial arts, it's this understanding of taking all things and sort of redirecting them, that it's actionless action. And that is exactly, for their understanding, how the Tao works, that soft things overcome hard things. And we're going to read that in today's thing. And again, we can connect that back to Christ, because look at the virtues of Christ. Christ overcame the world through love, mercy, and compassion. These soft virtues, if you will. Now, again, we don't think that, but the world might think that. Through these soft virtues, God, Christ, man overcomes the world. And Taoism's all about how soft things can become harder or destroy hard things. Very interesting. And that's tied to their understanding of the 5 elements, right? Because in their understanding of the 5 elements, the metal, the wood, the fire, the wind, the water, all these things are decomposing, destructing, rebuilding each other. And so that is a sort of actionless action. It's the ultimate way of nature or the world itself. Then you have a concept called Ren, R-E-N. Ren is the human-heartedness. This is another interesting concept that I think connects back to our own Christian theology, is that human-heartedness, that Ren is a Taoist concept related to the unique moral inclinations of humans. Humans are not animals in Taoism. Yes, we are part of the natural world. We are simpatico with the ecosystems we live in. And again, by our aligning ourselves with Tao, we need to align ourselves with that. However, we aren't the same thing as animals. And they point towards the human heart. Very interesting, because our own Christian theology talks about the nous. Remember, the eye of the heart, the eye of the soul, our noetic capabilities through our heart. Very interesting that Taoism also has a similar concept to that. Then we have the 3 pure ones. Some of you are going to be familiar that within Taoism, and there's many different schools within Taoism, but generally speaking, all the schools of Taoism recognize the 3 pure ones. And these are, in a way, the sort of 3 highest gods in Taoism, in the Taoist pantheon. And they are pure manifestations of the Tao. So the Tao, abstract, no personhood, ultimate, ground of all being. It then has 3 manifestations, 3 gods. Sound familiar? Sound a little familiar to our worldview? The 3 pure ones, they are pure manifestations of the Tao and are the origin of all sentient beings. So all beings, us included, come from the 3 pure ones. Interesting. Sounds a bit like a sort of non-revealed precursor to the Trinity itself. And again, we see when we look in Taoism, this relationship between the 1 and 3, because 3 gives rise to everything, and the 1 gives rise to the 3. And that's exactly our understanding, as the Father gives rise to the Spirit and the Son, and the Trinity itself gives rise to the entire universe. That's exactly consistent with our own worldview. Obviously, we're not going to phrase it in the Taoist understanding of a sort of non-personal, abstract understanding of the Tao. It's like saying basically there's divine essence, and then we have the 3 persons of the Trinity. We wouldn't go that, because, again, using the Greek philosophical categories and everything, we would say, again, the Father is in essence, that divinity. He is, in essence, the Tao. And he does have a personhood, and then he, through his will, manifests or precedes the Spirit and begets the Son. And this is an eternal process that is a conundrum to even think about, because we are limited by space and time and really can't fathom eternity and the Trinity itself. But it's very interesting that Taoism has a similar concept. And then we have the 3 treasures of Taoism. Some of you guys may have heard about the 3 treasures, and they refer to the basic virtues of compassion, moderation, and humility. Are those emphasized in our religion as Christians? Does Christ emphasize compassion, moderation, and humility? Absolutely. Absolutely. Those are emphatic within our own religious tradition, and those are considered the three treasures of Taoism. Now, sometimes the three treasures are also referred to as the Taoist anthropology, and this is related to traditional Chinese medicine in regards to your qi system, the energetic system sort of circulating through your body. That's why they're into acupuncture, things like this, to sort of open up the circuitry of the body so that energy, qi, the breath, the wind that they believe of the Tao, the Holy Spirit, they believe can better circulate through the body. And so they have a Taoist anthropology is called Jing, Qi, and Shen. Jing is considered essence. That's often how it's translated. Qi is life force, energy, and then Shen is spirit. And so in a way, the three treasures, the Taoist understanding of human anthropology is sort of an essence, a life force, and a spirit. Very interesting stuff there as well. And then the last term that I wanted to dive into is Ziran, central value of Taoism, returning to or attaining the primordial state of all things, true naturalness. And sort of the metaphor that's often used to talk about Ziran is like an uncarved block. Basically, the metaphor that's often used in Taoism is that we are in origin an uncarved block, but where we then are born, the cultures we live in, the languages, then form us into the sort of unique substantiation, the unique person we are, and then in a way we're limited by that form. And so the Taoists then want to go back to that ultimate naturalness, that uncarved block. How does that relate to us, our Christian theology? Well, I would say that uncarved block is in a way a sort of attempt to get back to the pre-fallen man, right? We are, again, limited by our sort of own fallen human nature, and there's this inclination that we need to get back to our pristine state that was sometime before. We see this understanding even within Taoism. So that's kind of the grammar. Again, I'm not trying to hit you guys with too much of the grammar before we dive into this book, because this book's really what this stream is about, and I've kind of rambled too long. But one of the few things I want to say then about Logos theology before we dive into is that a few of the aspects that I want us to keep in mind in regards to Logos theology, these unique attributes, again, regarding the Eastern Orthodox Church, and how we might or may not find these within Taoism. So the first one is Logospermaticos, which I talked to you about, not a concept within Taoism. This is a unique concept within Orthodoxy. Again, this concept of Logos, which the basis of this book is that the Logos and the Tao are very similar in understanding, and that the Logos or the Tao can then be found in every place. Now, a Taoist would absolutely agree with that. That the Tao, wherever you're at in the world, there is the Tao, and wherever truth is the Tao. They don't have a specific, from my understanding, and I could be here misinformed, but I just don't know of a specific term or concept within Taoism that is sort of simpatico with Logospermaticos. One that we are definitely going to see a differentiation on between our tradition and Taoism is the theology of personhood, right? Our whole theology is based in the realization and the revelation that we are made in the image of God. And so all these higher faculties that we participate in that the animals do not, like love and logic and reason and truth and justice and compassion and mercy and all these different things, these are all non-physical. You can't touch any of them. And we would say these then come from God, and that only persons made in the image, of which there's three persons and one essence, they have a personhood, and we then are made in the image having that personhood, and then we can participate in those higher level activities. Taoism does not have this theology of personhood. And that's why the Tao is very abstract. It's apophatic. They don't talk about personhood at all because they are a very apophatic tradition, and it's always about negation. It's about what you can't say, about what you can't know. And it leaves up the sort of mystery, the darkness, I think, and one thing we'll read today is the darkness within darkness of the Tao, right? It's so transcendent, it's beyond comprehension. We agree with that. But because we are a revealed tradition as opposed to a natural theology, as Taoism is, We, through our revelation of Scripture in Genesis, believe that we then are made in the image, which, again, they're not going to have that same presupposition. The nous. There's going to be some similarities here with the Taoist understanding of the heart, and the heart even having noetic activities. Now, the nous, as I've said before, is a Greek word for mind, and mind is not exactly the correct translation for the Eastern Orthodox understanding of nous. Nous within the Eastern Orthodox context is a sort of noetic faculty of the heart, the eye of the heart, the eye of the soul. And so we believe that the morality that we live then can taint our noetic abilities, our ability to understand and perceive God in the world, that we have to cleanse ourselves, we have to become more like God to see more of God, that there is a relationship between God revealing himself to us and us purifying ourselves to become more like him. This is part of our understanding of the nous. And this is then part of our process of theosis, because if you're cleansing your nous, then you're participating in the uncreated energies of God, and therefore you are being divinized by those energies. And so a similarity between our tradition and Taoism is it's all about divinization, attaining immortality. That's the point. Death is the enemy. And so Taoism would also agree with that. They're not going to have those doctrines, but we need to keep in mind our understanding of nous and our understanding of theosis. And then, as I mentioned, divine revelation, they're not going to have that. And then the Trinity, they don't have, the Tao is not three, the Tao is one. However, three and threeness appears over and over and over and over again. And in fact, one of these chapters, one of these green tags here we're going to read is in fact about the Taoist understanding of the Trinity. So that is going to be our stream. We are now going to dive into this. Let me take care of a few sort of housekeeping. Guys, smash that like. If anybody would like to support my work and Church of the Eternal Logos and what we're doing here, please become a website member. That is the best way to support my work. You can do so for a $5 a month membership. You'll have access to an exclusive video library. We now have, and I need to fill out the description, a $15 Logos membership, fitness membership, which we are going to have a sort of encouraging group. People who sign up, we're going to encourage each other, being Orthodox Christians, to maintain our fitness no matter what you do. If you're into bodybuilding, powerlifting, CrossFit, band work, whatever it is, we're going to meet regularly, encourage each other, do progress reports, talk about diets, talk about, fasting periods and how we're staying strong and fit. And so that is a new option over at the website for members. And then, of course, we have the $25 a month option for premium members, of which we get into private groups and chat basically for a couple hours or more every other week on Thursday evening. So if you're interested in those, please sign up. Would greatly appreciate that and love for you guys to be there. Also, if anybody would like to sign up for a one-on-one session, you can do so with this link right here. And I would greatly appreciate that. If anybody would like to sign up or talk about whatever topic you're interested in. And then, of course, if you also want to sponsor a stream, again, special shout out to Anthony DeSanto for tonight's stream. It was his choice for me to dive into this topic again and focus again on these Western or the theological understandings of Logos and how this relates to Taoism. So as you'll note, our emphasis in tonight's stream is a little bit different than the last time I discussed Christ the Eternal Tao. So if that is something, if you would like to sponsor a stream, make sure to sign up using this link right here. And you'll email me, tell me what topic you want me to dive into, and I will do it. And that link is right there. So without further ado, actually, what do I have? Some other announcements. I'm going to try the next stream. Again, we have one more member stream coming on Bowling Alone. I gotta dive into that book to do that one. And I also want to do our next introduction to a world religious tradition is going to be on Buddhism. Really looking forward to diving into that and giving an academic introduction to the tradition of Buddhism. Half of that will be public here on YouTube. The other half will be over on the website for members. So that's some of the stuff coming up. Really looking forward to it. So now let's dive back into our stream, and we're going to read the introduction to this book. So now the rest of this stream is really going to be about this book here. And so what I want to do is actually read the introduction to you guys, because I think it's really insightful, and it's going to give a good context for how Orthodox Christianity, clergy, not me, not Patrick, not here doing, Church of the Eternal Logos stuff, but actual clergy, Father Seraphim Rose, Higher Monk Damascene, other church fathers, how they've approached this topic. So first thing I want to say is, again, we're going to be reading is the introduction, the Tao and the Logos. This is how it begins. Christ, the eternal Tao, was inspired by the life of the Chinese scholar Hieromonk Seraphim Rose. So our beloved Seraphim Rose, again, here of America, of Western, the West and California, again, dove into many of the same rabbit holes that we did growing up. Like I said, his teacher at one point was Alan Watts. He got into the Eastern mysticism and all that type of stuff. The counterculture, eventually becomes an Orthodox monk in Northern California. And it's through his working with Jiming Xian in San Francisco, in California, where he learned Chinese, read the Tao Te Ching, saw these similarities, and when he became an Orthodox monk, worked on sort of bringing these ideas together, and it was his student, Hieromonk Damascene, that then wrote this book here. So, okay. Hieromonk Seraphim Rose, then known as Eugene Rose, and by his teacher, the philosopher Jiming Xian. And Jiming's transmission of the ancient Chinese tradition, one is struck by how closely it resembles the ancient Greek tradition. And Jiming, in fact, taught that the early Chinese and Greek philosophers were basically alike in their view of the universe. So what's he talking about there? Well, as I have a whole section on this channel, is about the development of Logos, talking about Heraclitus. Heraclitus, and we're going to mention this in this introduction, is the first Greek to write down the term Logos. Now, we believe that the term Logos, the concept of Logos, obviously predated Heraclitus. Heraclitus, the obscure one, was noted for writing in a time that people didn't write things down. And so Heraclitus wrote about the Logos, this unifier of opposites, this basic sort of ground of reality, the basis of patterns and orders and math and logic. So, a very abstract concept of Logos, but Heraclitus is writing about this in, say, 5th century BC. 5th, 6th century BC. And that leads eventually to Plato. Plato then develops further this concept of Logos in regards to his ideas of the forms, right? The Logos, okay, I'm sitting in a chair. I have a physical chair, but then there's the ideal of a chair. And if we still have the idea of a chair, we can always make chairs. Where does the ideal exist at? It's non-physical. It's in the realm of the ideals. It's the realm in the ideas. It's the Platonic realm. That is tied to the Logos. And so then Plato develops this sort of Logos archetypal philosophy a little bit further, that all these archetypes of reality are all rooted back into this Logos, which he believed was a sort of first creation of the good. That was his God, the good. And so Logos for Plato was still created. Okay, it wasn't God in essence. This leads to somebody like Aristotle, where Logos is tied to rhetoric, and you had Logos, Pathos, Ethos, right? The different forms of rhetoric, and so he really focuses on Logos in regards to its relationship to logic and order, and in a rhetorical lens of how that is understood. That leads to then the Stoics, who see Logos as the sort of the basis of nature itself, right? And so virtue in Stoicism is the highest good. Virtue, we act virtuously because if we act virtuously, that then links us up to the Logos. All virtues and all good things and all things that are natural and good come from the Logos within Stoicism. And so our job as Stoics then is to align our will, become virtuous, detach ourselves from the world, and then that's how we're going to align ourselves with this sort of cosmic will of the Logos. Very similar to Taoism. Very, very similar to Taoism. The Stoicism and its sort of relation of the Tao. Now, in Logos. Now that leads to Philo of Alexandria. I've did a whole series on this. Philo of Alexandria is the first Hellenistic Jew, focusing on the Septuagint. He rereads the Old Testament and says, I see the Greek concept of the Logos present in the Old Testament. Now, this is really important. Of course, Philo existed at the same time of Christ. He's over in Egypt. Christ is over in Jerusalem, or at least, that area. They never meet, but Philo of Alexandria normalizes this understanding that this Greek concept of logos, the word, can be found in the Old Testament. Now, obviously, we believe Christ is the incarnation of that logos, and then when we get to the Gospel of John, in the beginning was the logos was with God, and the logos was God. John is bringing all these things together in his gospel. In the Gospel of John, he's bringing the entire philosophical tradition of the Greeks together with the prophetic in the Old Testament tradition of the Hebrews all in one book, and showing how the Logos, in fact, is the Jewish Messiah. It is Jesus Christ, and it is the thing that the Greeks have been talking about this whole time. Okay, so let's continue then. In the history of ancient China, Father Seraphim said, there are moments when it is absolutely incredible how the same things happen in Chinese life as happened in the West, even though there was no outward connection between the two civilizations. The first of the Greek philosophers, Thales and so forth, lived about the 6th century BC, just about the time Confucius was in China and Buddha was in India. It is as though there really was a, quote, spirit of the times. Heraclitus, born in the middle of the 6th century BC, was one of the first Greek philosophers for the riddling character of his writings. He was surnamed the Obscure, even in antiquity. He based his philosophy on the Logos, a word which itself means word, but which bears the connotations of measure, proportion, and pattern. The Logos of Heraclitus, according to one textbook of Greek philosophy, quote, is the first principle of knowledge. Understanding of the world involves understanding of the structure of pattern of the world, a pattern concealed from the eyes of ordinary men. The Logos is also the first principle of existence. The unity of the world processes which sustain it as a process. This unity lies beneath the surface, for it is a unity of diverse and conflicting opposites, and whose strife the Logos maintains a continual balance. The Logos maintains the equilibrium of the universe at every moment. Although Heraclitus taught that all things change and nothing remains at rest, he knew that the Logos to be itself stable and measured the flow of all patterns. Okay, I got to turn this heater off. I got a heater on in my room. Give me 1 second. I apologize. I'm burning up. Okay, we're good. So, it's obviously cold. Winter is coming. And I had my heater on the whole time I was studying or preparing for today's stream. And of course, right when I stream, now, the heat gets up and I'm sweating. So, continuing on. About that same time that Heraclitus lived in Greece, there lived in China the philosopher Laozi. Laozi wrote that the same universal pattern or ordering principle that Heraclitus styled the Logos. I do not know its name, he said, but characterize it as the way, the Tao. The Tao being a symbol basic to Chinese thought, as the Logos was the ancient Greek thought. For Laozi, the way was precisely what its adopted name signified in its full metaphysical sense. The way, the path, or the pattern of heaven, the course that all things follow. The way is the uncreated cause of all things. It is the way that creates, and it is the way that nourishes, develops, cares for, shelters, comforts, and protects the creation, balancing the strife of opposites by itself, not contending. Again, sort of a collapsing of dialectical tension there is what the author's hinting at. Of the writings of Heraclitus, only a handful of fragments have come down to us, but from Laozi, we have a full 81 chapters of the Tao Te Ching. Of all the ancient philosophers, Laozi came the closest to assimilating the essence of reality and describing the Tao or Logos. His Tao Te Ching represents the epitome of what a human being can know through intuition, through the apprehension of universal principle and pattern manifested in the created order itself. 6 centuries after Heraclitus and Laozi, there lived on the Greek island of Patmos an old, white-haired hermit named John. While exiled in a cave on the island, he dedicated to his disciple Prochorus what he had received from the direct revelation from the heavenly realm, from divine vision, and thus spoke to the world words that it never thought to hear. In the beginning was the Logos. The Logos was with God, and the Logos was God. The same was in the beginning with God. All things were made by him, and without him was not anything made that was made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. And the light shines in darkness, and the darkness comprehended it not. He was in the world, and the world was made by him, and the world knew him not. And the Logos became flesh, and dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory. This was the very Logos of which Heraclitus had said the people, quote, always proved to be uncomprehending, unquote. This was the very Tao that Laozi had said, quote, no one in the world is able to understand. It is not without reason that sensitive Chinese translators of St. John's Gospel, knowing what that Tao meant to the Chinese, meant Logos, or Logos meant the same to the Greeks, have rendered the first line of the Gospel of John to read, in the beginning was the Tao. When the Apostle John wrote his Gospel, he was no doubt aware of the common Greek philosophical symbol of the Logos, but as can be clearly seen by a comparison of that Gospel with the riddles of Heraclitus or the writings of other philosophers, when he spoke from revelation, he was not merely borrowing an old term, rather he was transforming it, bringing it into the light of the fullness of mystical knowledge. When he spoke of the Logos, it was no longer the riddles as from one who had only glimpsed its traces in nature. For now the Logos, the creator, sustainer, pattern, and ordering principle of nature was made flesh and dwelt among us for the only time in history. And John, his disciple, had seen him. He had beheld his glory and heard the words which proceeded from his mouth, being offered the ultimate closeness to him who had only been dimly seen before. He had even lain on his breast, and in the greatest mysteries had received him into himself at the Last Supper. Thus, while Laozi's Tao Te Ching represents the highest that a person can know through intuition, St. John's Gospel represents the highest that a person can know through revelation. That is, through God making himself known and experienced in the most tangible way. Now, here's a little section on on Seraphim Rose and his teacher. So growing up in the 1940s and early 1950s, the aforementioned Father Seraphim Rose rejected the modern American Christianity which he had been raised, finding it to be boring, sterile, empty. In quest of a true apprehension of reality, he undertook an extensive study of the ancient Chinese tradition, first under Alan Watts, and then under a more authentic transmitter of this tradition, the humble and virtuous Jiming Qian. Jiming had studied under sages in China, among whom were Zhu Yang, Qing Wu, Ma Yefu, as well as some of the greatest Chinese thinkers of the century. Under his tutelage, Father Seraphim learned ancient Chinese in order to study the Tao Te Ching in the original language. He helped Jiming to translate the Tao Te Ching into English, and Jiming opened to him the deeper meaning of its contents. It was Jiming who first told Father Seraphim that the Logos of the ancient Greeks is the same of the Tao of Laozi. From the writings of the French metaphysician René Guénon, Father Seraphim had learned the necessity of adhering to the traditional Orthodox form of a religion. This enabled him to value Jiming as an Orthodox representation of the Chinese tradition, and then led him finally and unexpectedly back to the ancient Orthodox form of the religion he had rejected in his younger days. Just as the ancient Greeks had once seen the fulfillment of their philosophy in the revelation of Christ, so Father Seraphim recognized the fulfillment of the philosophy of Laozi in the ancient Orthodox Christianity the Christianity that the Greeks and by extension the Russians had preserved. Jiming Qian later disappeared mysteriously to the great sadness of Father Seraphim, who to the end of his days remembered him with the deepest admiration and gratitude. Father Seraphim went on to become an Orthodox Christian monk and writer in the mountains of Northern California, and since his death in 1982, he has unexpectedly become the best-loved spiritual writer in Russia. It was through him that the writer of the present book discovered the depth of ancient, unadulterated Christianity, and along with Father Seraphim found it to be the fullness of what he had been probing for in Laozi. This book is an offering to those of like mind who have found much of contemporary American Christianity to be trivial and cliché, and yet who still have a longing for Christ. Through the wisdom of ancient God-illuminated Christian teachers, whom we have quoted extensively, we will show that Christ's revelation is indeed the consummation of what has been glimpsed by the great pre-Christian sages. Modern syncretism and ancient apologetics. This book's comparison of the Tao Te Ching with Christian scriptures opens it up to the accusation of being merely another attempt at religious syncretism. A serious reading of this text, however, will bear out that this is not the case. Religious syncretism in its modern form regards all paths as possessing equal truth simultaneously, and in so doing is forced to overlook certain basic distinctions or to offer complicated explanations in order to rationalize these distinctions away. The ancient Christian teachers, on the other hand, took a more honest and discerning approach, which in the end proved to be more simple, natural, and organic. Rather than mixing all the religions together like the moderns do, the ancients understood that there was an unfolding of wisdom throughout the ages. They saw foreshadowings, glimpses, and prophecies of Christ not only among the ancient Hebrews, but also among the peoples who lived before him. And they saw the writings of pre-Christian sages as a preparation for Christ as the apogee of revelation. This is explained most clearly in the quote by St. Seraphim, which begins this book. If we concede, and that is, I believe, St. Seraphim of Sarov, if we concede that the pre-Christian philosophers did seek the truth and that they did catch glimpses of it, it only stands to reason that their teachings should bear some similarities, like a broken reflection of the moon and water, to the fullness of truth in Jesus Christ. Therefore, these similarities need not appear as a threat to Christianity. Instead, they offer one more proof of Christ as the universal truth. Guys, please smash that like for everybody who's here. I'd greatly appreciate it. Christ the eternal Tao, then, should be seen as following not in the modern syncretic tradition, but rather in the ancient apologetic tradition. The latter began less than a century after Christ with St. Justin Martyr and St. Clement of Alexandria and Lactantius. And speaking to the Greek polytheists of his time, St. Justin called upon the testimony of the pre-Christian Greek philosophers and poets who, like Laozi, taught that there are not many gods, but only one God, the uncreated cause and creator of the universe, omnipotent, eternal, and infinite. Each of these writers, Justin affirmed, quote, spoke well in proportion to the share that he had of the Logos disseminated among people, seeing what was related to it, for all the writers were able to see realities darkly through the sowing of the implanted Logos that was in them, unquote. Elsewhere, Justin went so far as to call the pre-Christian sages by the name of Christian. Those, quote, who lived in accordance with the Logos are Christians, even though they were called godless, such as among the Greeks Socrates and Heraclitus and others like them. So also those who lived before Christ and did not live by the Logos were ungracious and enemies of Christ, and murderers of those who lived by the Logos. But those who lived by the Logos and those who now live by it are Christians, fearless and unperturbed. In the generation, unquote, in the generations immediately after Justin, St. Clement, and Lactantius continued in this tradition by pointing to ancient writers who believed in one God. Among the philosophers they cite is Hermes Trismegistus, who believed in a divine mind, and who, like Laozi, believing in the Tao, says that the Creator is one, self-existent, and without a name. The Greeks, says Lactantius, speak of God as the Logos, for Logos signifies both speech and reason, inasmuch as that he is both the voice and the wisdom of God, and that this divine speech, not even the philosophers were ignorant, since Zeno represents the Logos as the arranger of the established order of things and the framer of the universe, whom he calls fate, and the necessity of things and God of the soul of Jupiter, in accordance with the custom, indeed, by which they are wont to regard Jupiter as God. But the words are not the words are no obstacle, since the sentiment is in agreement with the truth, unquote. Justin and Lactantius praise Socrates because, again, like Laozi, he refrained from seeing forth precise, defined teachings about those things which he had not been shown to him through divine revelation. In the spirit of Laozi, Socrates, he said, quote, "It is neither easy to find the Father and Maker of all, nor having found him, is it possible to declare him to all," unquote. They also extolled Socrates for not paying homage to the false gods, whom the state recognized and all the people worshipped, for even being killed for this. This was because, writes Justin, quote, "Christ was partially known even by Socrates, for he was and is the Logos, who is in every person." And again, that's our concept of Logospermaticos, and the idea of Logos being in every person is again part of our theology of being made in the image. Over and above the sayings of the philosophers, the sayings of the 10 virgin prophetesses known as the Sibyls were cited by ancient Christian writers as pointing to the belief in the one invisible God, offering clear prophecies to the coming of Christ. Virgil, who died 19 years before the birth of Christ, used the prophecies of the Sibyl of Cumae to predict in the 4th Eclogue that the Messiah would, quote, "come down from heaven," unquote, be born as an infant from a virgin, and bring in an age which, quote, "all stains of our past wickedness would be cleansed," unquote. And that all this would take place during the reign of Virgil's friend, the Consul Pollio. This indeed occurred. And quoting from sages who lived before Christ, Justin, Clement, and Lactantius corrected their mistakes, which they attributed to the times in which the sages lived. Whatever either lawgivers or philosophers uttered well, says Justin, quote, "they elaborated by finding and contemplating some part of the Logos. But since they did not know the whole of the Logos, which is Jesus Christ, they often contradicted themselves," unquote. And Lactantius writes, quote, "people of the highest genius touched upon the truth and almost grasped it, had not custom, infatuated by false opinions, carried them back," unquote. At the same time, both Justin and Lactantius embraced the truths uttered by the ancient sages as their own. Quote, "whatever things were truly said among people," Justin affirms, "it belongs to us Christians," unquote. Neither Justin, Clement, or Lactantius could have heard of Laozi, for that has been said above. However, there can be no doubt that, had they lived in China rather than in the Greek and Roman world, they would have brought forth Laozi as a pre-Christian witness of Christ, the Logos. The ancient Greek and Romanian Orthodox monasteries and churches today, one can find wall paintings of the ancient Greek philosophers who are thus honored as seekers of truth before the coming of Christ. Even the staunchest Christians in Greece refer to Socrates as, quote, "the apostle to the pagans." The best-loved Greek saint of our own century, Saint Nectarios, said that Socrates and, quote, "divine Plato," unquote, were at times, quote, "inspired by God," unquote. If the Greek philosophers can be honored in this way, cannot also Laozi, who came even closer than they to describing the Logos, the Tao, before he was made flesh and dwelt among us? All right. And so with that being said, now we are going to dive into some of this stuff. So the first thing that I want to get into, and I read this last time, but I think it's really important, is this is the first Ennead, right? You see that? The first Ennead, in the beginning was the way. So the Tao Te Ching's divided into these Enneads, which obviously is 9 parts, and there's 9 parts of 9 sections. So there's 81 sections, right? And so the first sections of 9, the first Ennead, in the beginning was the way. And so I want to describe what exactly the author is doing here, because we're going to read some of these Enneads. And it's a fusion, it's a mixture between the Taoist Tao Te Ching, infusing words and concepts with orthodoxy. So in this part, the part that we're getting ready to read, we will not only look at Christ through the innocent eyes of the intuitive vision of Laozi, we will also present Laozi's teachings in the light of a new revelation. Therefore, what follows might be considered not only a gospel according to Laozi, but also a New Testament of the Tao Te Ching. In keeping with this idea, we have followed the Tao Te Ching's division into 81 chapters based on multiples of 3. Here it should be noted that the ancient Chinese placed great significance on the number 3, seeing it as the primal principle of order. And in this way, their teachings foreshadows Christ's revelation of the mystical life of the Triadic Godhead. And that references page 257, of which, again, we're going to read. In chapter 42 of the Tao Te Ching, Laozi wrote, quote, "Three produced all things," unquote. The chapters of the Tao Te Ching itself were divided into 9 groups of 9, or 9 enneads, 9 being 3 groups of 3. In this part, we have followed the same pattern. In order to unlock the mysteries of Laozi, we have made use of the teachings and insights of Jiming Xian, as recorded in Father Seraphim Rose's lectures, notes on Jiming's classes on the Tao Te Ching. Then, in bringing Laozi's wisdom into a new dimension, we have drawn extensively from Eastern Christian writings spanning nearly 2 millennia. These sources are included in the notes at the end of this book, together with a commentary on the text. In quoting the Tao Te Ching, we have relied primarily on the herefore unpublished partial translation of it by Jiming and Father Seraphim Rose, which we have found to be the most penetrating, but we have also referred to numerous other translations and to the original Chinese text. Okay, so let's get into it. In the beginning was the way. Chapter 1. So we're going to read, I'm only going to read a few of these enneads. I want to read to you guys the one on the beginning of the way, and then I want to read you guys the one on the way of humility and forgiveness, because it is so insightful to see how Taoism talks about humility, compassion. Remember what we talked about, the 3 treasures, compassion, moderation, and humility. So Taoism also has this idea that you must be humble to align yourself back with the Tao, which is exactly how the lowest become the greatest, right? In regards to Christ's teachings and us as Christians, right? We're trying to constantly be humble. We're kind of trying to constantly repent so that we can realign ourselves with that divine will. And we're going to see that Taoism has again, they don't have the revelation, they don't have the personhood or the description of Christ, but they have this idea that it's through humility that you get back to the way. And that's exactly what we also believe. And then, so that is the 6th ennead. So we're going to read the first ennead, the first 9. We're going to read the 6th ennead, the 6th 9, and then we're going to read the 9th ennead, following the way of truth, which is the last 9. And then we're going to dive into some of these reflections towards the end of the book on various topics. And I chose those topics based on the similarities or the dimensions of Logos theology that I mentioned. So we're going to look at divinization. We're going to look at the nous and concepts of the heart, noetic attributes of the heart. We're going to look at the Taoist understanding of the Trinity and stuff like that. So we're going to get into that after we get into the first ennead, the 6th ennead, and the 9th ennead. So here we go. The first ennead. Chapter 1. Before light was made, and here you can see what I'm looking at. Before light was made, there was the primal light. That was not made. The primal essence, dwelling in the darkness of incomprehensibility. Of this the ancient prophet spoke, saying, "He made darkness his secret place, the formless and immaterial place of knowledge, whither our understandings or concepts gain no admittance." And the ancient sage spoke too of this, calling it, quote, "the darkness within darkness, the gate of all mystery." There is no name whereby the primal essence can be named, neither in this age nor in the age to come. We call him essence, for he is a sea of essence, intermediate and without bounds, spreading far and wide beyond all notion of time and nature. He is wholly essence and solely essence, and yet he is above essence, because he is not of the essence of anything that is. We call him being. All right. For before all else was, he is, and yet he is above being. Now, of course, what they're doing here is adding pronouns. Laozi doesn't have the pronouns for the Tao, but we're adding those in to see the similarities of Logos, Christ, the second person, the Trinity, and then the Taoism. So, before all else was, he is. Yet he is above being, above all existing things, even above existence itself. We call him the One, for he alone is wholly, simple, and without parts. Yet he transcends the antinomy of the One and the many. Again, so he transcends the one and the many. He is neither one nor unity, neither many nor multiplicity. Finally, we call him mind or thought, for he is himself mind, by essence, wholly mind and solely mind, and yet he's entirely above mind and thought too, for every thought expresses a duality, the relationship of the thinker and the object of the thought. Neither of these two can return to complete simplicity in itself, for the thinker has need of the object, and the object has the need of the thinker. But the primal essence is neither of those who think nor what is thought of, for he is beyond both of them, unlimited, self-existing, free and simple, standing in need of nothing. To conceive or be conceived is proper to the nature of things, secondary to the primal essence. Thus, the essence that can be conceived of as essence is not the primal essence. The being that can be limited to existence is not that of the primal being. The one that can be limited to the concept of oneness is not the primal unity. And the mind that can be thought of is not the primal mind. The one who still in some way possesses any thought has not yet left duality and arrived at simplicity. But the one who has completely abandoned it and has arrived in some fashion at the primal mind through having supremely relinquished the power of thinking. So that's pretty good stuff. Here's the next one, chapter 2. As our mind utters from itself a word, so did the primal mind utter the primal word, the Logos. The primal mind's essence is a womb. The primal mind's essence is a father. Out of this womb of the mind, the word has begotten outside time. Of this birth, the ancient prophet spoke, speaking as the father mind. From the womb, that is, from my essence, before the morning star, have I begotten you. And of this birth, the ancient sage also spoke, saying, something mysteriously formed, born before heaven and earth, tranquil, boundless, dependent on nothing, and changing not. Mind does not exist without word, nor word without mind. A thought of the mind is a word hidden within. A word is a thought which has come without. I love that one. A word is a thought that has come without. Thought is transformed into word, and word transmits thought to the hearers. Mind coming from itself is thus the father of the word, and the word is the son of the mind. Before the mind, the word was impossible, and the word does not come from anywhere outside, but rather from the mind itself. Thus also the Father, the all-embracing mind, the thought above and beyond thoughts, has a Son begotten of his essence, the Word, above and beyond words. Chapter 3. As our actions proceed from our mind, so does the primal action proceed from the primal mind. As the primal word is like a sound, a still sound, so is the primal action like a breath, a still breath. And as a breath rests in a word that is uttered, so does the primal breath rest in the primal word. In you there is breath, material and impersonal, diffusing itself while sustaining your separate and distinct life. In the primal essence, as life itself, there is also breath, but a breath that is purely spiritual and personal, not diffusing itself, but sustaining the life of everything without distinction. The breath of the primal mind is like a wind. The wind blows where it wills. You hear its sound, but cannot tell whence it comes or where it goes. So is the breath who rests in the word. And so are those beings who rest in the breath of heaven. Chapter 4. Before the world was made, the mind, word, and breath were one. Sharing in the one essence above all essences, the oneness of these persons is a mystery, whose vastness cannot be comprehended by even the highest spirits. Nevertheless, we attempt to give a name to this mystery of oneness, the name of love. The name so great that, finding it impossible to give it due reverence, people despair and treat it as commonplace. The mind, word, and breath had this perfect love between them. Not only did they have this love, They are this love. Therefore, love existed before the world was even made. The love of the maker of things cannot merely be extended outwardly to the universe made by him. In the three, this love is directed inwardly also within the primal essence, in the mystical inward life hidden in the depths of the divinity. For the three have always been one, but the world did not know this love until the Word himself came into it, sent by the mind as the messenger of the world, or a messenger to the world of the primal love that had created it. End of chapter 4. Chapter 5. Again, we're in the first Ennead on the way of, it was called the Gospel according to Laozi. In the beginning was the way. Chapter 5. The triangle is the first full form. The three is the principle of order. The order that must exist before the multiplicity of things. Therefore, the ancient sage said, the three produces all things, the three acting as one not acting without the others. The triad contains itself in perfection, for it is the first that surpasses the dyad. It lies beyond the duality of matter, of subject and object, of self and other. The triad is beyond the distinction of the one and the many. Its perfection goes beyond the multiplicity of which duality is the root. 2 is the number that separates. 3 is the number that transcends all separation. The one and the many find themselves gathered together in the three. For the triad, being many, is also a unity. Not a unity of self-absorption, but a unity of love. For the three have one nature, one will, one power, one operation, but they cleave to each other, having their being in each other. This is the perfect love, the original unity, the original harmony, the final mystery, to which no human thought has ever succeeded in rising. Chapter 6. The word is begotten of the mind. The breath proceeds from the mind. Yet there has never a time when the mind existed without the word or the breath. They dwelt in the darkness that was before darkness, outside time. Yet they made all things within time. For time and darkness came into being only when movement and light were made. By thinking which is beyond thought, the primal essence creates. The word brings forth and fulfills the command of the mind. The action breath accomplishes and perfects. And with these two hands of the mind, thought becomes deed. And so don't you see, again, we're getting ready to get on chapter 6 here. So we got 3 more within the first Ennead, 3 more chapters in the first Ennead. But you see the apophatic relationship to, again, this sort of fusing of logos into the beginnings of the Tao Te Ching here, the first Ennead of the Tao Te Ching. It's continually apophatic, right? It's always talking about the Tao, or in this case, the logos, in very apophatic words, right? It's beyond. It's beyond the name. It's beyond the one and the many. It's beyond form. It's beyond essence. Again, you see the continual apophatic nature of the Tao Te Ching here. So continuing on, chapter 7. The mind spoke through his child, the word, and through the word all things were made. Thus did the ancient prophet say, the mind spoke and all things came to be. He commanded and they were created. And, quote, by the word of the mind were the heavens established, unquote. Of this also did the ancient sage speak, calling the pre-eternal word, quote, the source of the 10,000 things. All things then were made by the word, the logos, and without him was nothing made that was made. All worlds, and within worlds, all matter, all life, all intelligences, of numbers so vast that their names should be written everyone. Even the word itself could not contain the books that should be written. The mind spoke through his child the word. In his breath there appeared the innumerable multitude of spirits. Therefore did the ancient prophet say, the mind spoke, and all the host of spirits were made by the breath of his mouth. The mind spoke, calling upon the pre-eternal counsel, the word and the breath, saying, "Let us make man." And through the breath of heaven, entering into man's nostrils, man became a living soul. The 10,000 things were created out of nothing, out of darkness, that was before darkness. And when this was accomplished, the still unchanging word resounded through all that was made, and the still unchanging breath blew through that was made, moving upon the face of the silent deep and giving to us life and motion. Okay. What are we at? We're already at an hour 42. I'm going to skip. We're going to skip the rest of the first Ennead. We're going to skip to the sixth Ennead, just due to time. I can't believe we're already at an hour 42. Usually I'm wrapping up my stream. I feel like I'm not even halfway yet. This is going to be forever. So I think we're in for a long haul tonight, guys. Okay, so now we're going to move to the sixth Ennead, the way of humility and forgiveness, okay? The way of humility and forgiveness. So this is chapter 46. Again, this is the first chapter of the sixth Ennead, the way of humility and forgiveness. So let's check this out. Chapter 46. Self-esteem, like desire for created things, breaks the original harmony, primal simplicity, making divisions in nature. It treats some things as worthless, using things in nature in an unnatural way. It corrupts them by misuse. As a person who desires created things, he is a slave to the senses. So is a person who has conceit. For the person of desire is attracted through his eyes and ears to others, while the person of conceit tries to attract the eyes and ears of others to himself. He charms and impresses only by what is visible and audible, those who judge virtue only with their senses. Thus said the ancient sage, on tiptoe none can stand firmly. Straddling none can walk well. One who justifies himself has no glory. One who boasts of one's ability has no merits. One who has conceit is not the chief among men. Such, by the judgment of the way, the Tao resembles the dregs and the tumors of virtue. Those who possess the way have no occasion for them. Chapter 47. The softest things in the universe, said the ancient sage. When it says ancient sage, it's referring to Laozi, okay? Said the ancient sage, overcomes the hardest things in the universe. So the softest things in the universe overcomes the hardest things in the universe. The stiff and unbending is the disciple of death. The gentle and yielding is the disciple of life. A tree that is unbending is easily broken. The hard and the strong will fall. The soft and weak will overcome. If a painful experience comes upon a humble soul, she bends and thus remains whole. Straight away she goes against herself. Straight away she accuses herself. And she does not set about accusing anyone else. Thus she goes on her way, untroubled, undepressed, in complete peace of mind, having no cause to be angry or to anger anyone else. Therefore, said the sage, mix with all that is humble as dust. This is called the original harmony. It cannot be made intimate, nor can it be alienated. It cannot be benefited, nor can it be harmed. It cannot be exalted, nor can it be debased. For this very reason, it is the highest, most valuable thing in the world. The humble soul, at one with the dust of the earth, knows the power behind saying, forgive me. She is among the strongest in the world, for nothing is more powerful than lowliness. Nice. Next chapter, chapter 48. The way, said the ancient sage, covers its cutting edge. It transcends entanglement, softens its light, and merges with dust. True humility cannot be defined in words, for it is the raiment of the primal essence himself. The way of heaven clothed himself in it. Descending from his loftiness, he used it to hide his splendor, lest his creation be consumed by the fiery vision. Creation could not look directly upon his uncreated light, nor could it hear the voice of his thunders. Therefore he descended not into an earthquake, nor in a fire, nor in a terrible and mighty sound, but, as said the ancient prophet, like rain upon a fleece, like raindrops falling upon earth softly, concealing himself in the veil of his flesh, speaking with us in the body, wrought in the womb of a maiden. Abasement, said the ancient sage, is the foundation of exaltation. Loftiness is based in lowliness. Hence the sage wears coarse garments, but embraces a jewel in his bosom. Everyone who puts on the coarse garment of humility is like unto the way, who put it on before us, when, through his wearing of a coarse body of our lowliness, creation beheld his loftiness, and at last received its jewel, the vision of its true maker. All right. Next chapter, chapter 49. Why is the sea the king of 100 streams? Asked the ancient sage. Because it lies below them. Therefore, it is the king of 100 streams. The master of the universe, showing us how to walk the way of humility, took a towel and, bending down below his disciples, washed their feet. Learn not from an angel, he said, nor from a man, nor from a book, but from me, from my indwelling, from my illumination and action within you. For I am meek and humble in heart and thought and in spirit, and your soul shall find rest from conflicts and relief from thoughts. For just as pride dissipates the soul through imagings and distractions, so humility collects the soul through stillness of the thoughts and concentrates her within herself. Thus the humble soul wishes to enter and dwell in stillness, to forsake her former concepts together with the senses, to become as something that does not exist in creation, that has not come into being in this world, that is totally unknown, even to herself, even to the senses. Thus hidden, she remains with the master of the universe, descending ever toward him, the infinite sea of essence, the king of 100 streams. All right, that was another good one. We're going to read one more. We're going to read chapter 50, again, of Ennead 6, and then we're going to dive into Ennead 9, because we got more to dive into here. So this is chapter 50 of Ennead 6. The ancient sage, a follower of the way, said, "The sage keeps his half of the bargain, but does not exact his due. A man of virtue performs his part, but a man without virtue requires others to fulfill their obligations." And the way, the Tao, when he became flesh, said, quote, "Give to everyone who asks you, and of him who and of him who takes away your goods, ask them not again. Do good and lend, hoping for nothing back." The way, the Tao, when he became flesh, gave his own life for those to whom he had given life. Yet he did not exact his due. Call him not just. For our frail nature would not be strong enough if his justice were to rise up to make exaction. Rather call him merciful. For he came employing mercy in place of justice, since at all times we are held by a debt. There is a bondsman for those who are bound by debt. There is a healer for those who have stumbled, who have bruised the simplicity of their original nature. There is a bondsman and a healer, even though he who asked that mercy be shown to his murderers, who pardoned them even as he hung on the tree. Quote, "The breath of heaven," unquote, he says, quote, "is upon me to preach good tidings to the poor, to heal the brokenhearted, to proclaim forgiveness to the captives, and to set free those who are bruised." All right. Next one, we're going to skip. So we're going to skip the rest of the 6th Ennead. We're going to move into the 9th Ennead, following the way of truth. Following the way of truth here. Okay, following the way of truth. Let's check it out. First one, chapter 73. The ancient sage, follower of the way, said, "The way is like an empty vessel. that may yet be drawn from without ever needing to be filled. It is like a deep pool that never dries. And the way the Tao, when he became flesh, said to the woman at the well, "Whoever drinks of the water I shall give him shall never thirst. But the water that I shall give him shall become in him a well of water springing up into unending life." Before you can drink of the still pool, concealed under the ground of sorrow, you must become like the pool. Become like the water, which can flow down. The water has one law to follow, and it never fails to follow it. People, too, have laws to follow. Laws of the universe, not invented by any man. Simple laws, yet unchanging. They're inexorable. There can be no others. There can be none better. Not even the maker of the universe will change you unless you change your mind. Unless you abandon the path of avarice, sensual pleasure, and self-exaltation. Unless you collapse, fold in on yourself, and open out of yourself. Unless you release everything, redirect all your energy, despoil yourself of all that is not of the way of the Tao, strip your heart of all created things, renounce your will, inclinations, whims, and fancies, and allow yourself to be carried by him downstream, down to the still pool, drinking of which you shall never thirst again. Okay, next chapter, chapter 74. When one loves, there is no decision to be made. The choice has already been made. Or better to say, it never needed to be made. It is not under one's control. It is the way that things are. So it is with the one who follows the way out of love, who becomes one with him. There is no decision to be made. There is nowhere else to go. It is the way things truly are. Next chapter, chapter 75. There are those, said the ancient sage, who would conquer the world and make of it what they desire. I see they will not succeed. The world is like a hollow utensil and cannot be manipulated. That which is not of the way the Tao soon fades away. Hence the sage assists the natural developments of all things, even though he does not venture to interfere in them. When something accords with the way, the Tao, all creation aids it. But when the way rejects something, creation too opposes it. The stream flows gently, but its course is inexorable. There are many directions, but there is only one way by which the stream flows. The way has been given to the soul freedom of movement and power over herself. Exercising this freedom and this power, she may think she is fulfilling her true nature, not knowing that her nature was made not merely to move, but to move in the right direction. As free as the way, one can go in many directions, but then one becomes a slave of those directions. As a slave of the way, of the Tao, one can follow not but one course, but then one is actually free. Universal freedom is a lie, because there is only one course in the universe, not many. Yet universal freedom is true, because in following the one universal course, one encompasses the cosmos. Having the freedom of choice, one chooses freedom from choice. That's some good stuff. Chapter 76. It is better to leave alone, said the ancient sage, than to forcibly attempt to make full. The hall that is filled with gold and jade is not easy to protect. Pride in riches and honors must lead to calamity. Even if we have a great abundance of everything, it will always seem to us that we are deprived. We will always be in fear, despondent, agitated, faint-hearted, every hour full of cares, anxieties, and vain sighing, until we turn again to the way and raise ourselves to Him. as the sunflower ever turns and raises itself to the sun. Chapter 77. The way is not found by those who seek after signs, although he may give signs. The way, the Tao, is not found by those who seek after wonders, though he may manifest wonders. The way, the Tao, is not found among those who seek after communion with spirits, though he alone is pure spirit and is adored by spirits. Those who seek after signs may behold false signs. Those who seek after wonders may be deceived by lying wonders. Those who seek after communion with spirits may come in contact with dark spirits hiding under the guise of light. The way, the Tao, is not found by those seekers, but by those who, whether they seek or not, are irresistibly drawn to what is wise and true, to what is simple and pure, to what is childlike, to what is lowly, and sadly, beautiful. Chapter 78. The way of heaven, being himself simple and undivided, wants souls to come to him to be simple and guileless, immune to crafty thinking, far removed from ulterior motive, with unmeddling thought, sincere character, frank and unpremeditated speech. Even customary human knowledge, with its many notions, deliberations, and subtleties, hinders one from entering into primal, unified simplicity, the guilelessness of one's true nature. Therefore, said the ancient sage, quote, empty yourself of everything, attain to the utmost purity, let the mind rest at peace, unquote. And the way of heaven, when he became flesh, said, quote, let not your heart be troubled, neither let it be afraid. Which of you, by taking thought, can add 1 cubit to its stature? If then you are not able to do as small a thing as that, why take thought for the rest? The follower of the way, the Tao, thus frees himself from worry, planning, and calculation, from slavery to human concepts, not allowing himself to be carried along by thoughts and images. He establishes himself in a childlike state of mind, becoming an infant. He yet lacks the deficiencies of an infant. Being adult, yet he lacks the complexities of an adult. Become as a little child once more, said the ancient sage. And the way, the Tao, when he became flesh, said, quote, unless you are converted and become as little children, you shall not enter into the kingdom of heaven, unquote. That is, into spiritual divine vision, wherein, as an innocent babe, one basks in the simple delight of the simple truth that is above compounded knowledge. For the secret things, said the way, the Tao, quote, have been hidden from the wise and prudent, and have been revealed unto babes, unquote. The pure in heart, and they alone, shall see him as he is. Wow. All right. Chapter 79 here. The essence of the way, the Tao, said the ancient sage, is supremely true. Within is the evidence. From the beginning until now is its name has remained, and it contains all truth. A two-faced person, one who is one thing outwardly and another inwardly, such a one not only lies, but makes his very life a lie. Guile and duplicity sap one's power, engendering cowardice and fear. But the honest and true person, one who is the same outwardly and inwardly, remains unconfused, and thus has boldness without fear. When the way, the Tao, returns, he will come with boldness and with power, and for there is no falsehood to be found in him. He has boldness because he is one. He has power because he is not double. He is inconquerable because he cannot be divided. His eye is single, and the light of his eye fills the whole body of his unique eternal being. Wholly single, simple, and unconfused, he is therefore wholly true. and not only true, nor yet an embodiment of truth, but he is truth itself. For he said, quote, I am capital T truth, unquote. All right. And now chapter 80 and then 81, and we're actually done with Ennead 9. They're a little bit shorter. So I'm going to read both chapter 80 and 81. They're real short. Chapter 80. The way the Tao is hidden and without name, said the ancient sage, yet it alone supports all things and brings them to fulfillment. When the way comes to a child, hurting, afraid, unknowing, the child becomes a man, deep, strong, and wise. When the way comes to a man jaded and stained, the man becomes a child, innocent and pure. In the way, the Tao, there is a reversal, a circle of return, that each thing may become whole and complete in itself, and each person a universe. Chapter 81. One who sees all ways as having equal truth will find his life not long enough to follow the way, the Tao, to the end. One cannot be simple and guileless, free of multiple deliberations. One will be as a person having many lovers, occupied with each, yet given wholly to none. One will not be married to the Tao, but will remain outside of the bridal chamber. To be married to the Tao is to become holy to him. Is to belong wholly to him. To belong wholly to him is to have him belong wholly to you. It is not only then that he can finish his work inside you, it is only then that he can carry you to his end. To his end, where there shall never be separation from him, the sole bridegroom. And that concludes the 9th Ennead of the Tao Te Ching here. So now we're going to flip up to, so here's a section, again, if you guys have this book, page 255 here. And the section I want to read to you is on foreshadowings of the Triadic mystery. So this is Higher Monk Damascene actually referencing the foreshadowings of, again, the Trinity to the Taoists. So here we go. Again, this is page 255 if you guys have this book. Hey, shout out to Anthony DeSanto. Guys, give shout out to Anthony DeSanto for sponsoring the stream. So all right. Hey, shout out to Patristic Faith. Shout out to Father Deacon. I don't know if he's still watching, but God bless him and the family. All right. Foreshadowing of the Triadic mystery, page 255. If the mystery of the Triadic One cannot be deduced through human powers, why did not God reveal it to Moses when he revealed the mystery of I Am? Archimandrite Sophrony answers as follows, quote, God revealed himself insofar as Moses could apprehend, for Moses could not contain the whole revelation. I will make all my goodness pass before you, and I will proclaim the name of the Lord before you. And while my glory passes by, I will cover you with my hand, and I will take away my hand, and you shall see my back parts, but my face shall not be seen. Centuries passed before the true content of the amazing name I Am was understood. For all the fervor of their faith, neither Moses nor the prophets who were his heirs appreciated to the full the blessing bestowed on them. They experienced God mainly through historical events. If they turned to him in spirit, they contemplated in darkness. When we, sons of the New Testament, read the Old Testament, we notice how God tried to suggest to our precursors that I Am is one being, and that at the same time, three persons. On occasions, he would even speak of himself as we, and God said, let us make man in our image after our likeness. And the Lord God said, behold, man is become as one of us. And An even more remarkable instance occurs with Abraham. 3 men appear to him, yet he addressed them as if they were all but one person. Here, in speaking of the glimpses of the triadic oneness in the Old Testament, we cannot neglect to mention the startling phrase in chapter 42 of the Tao Te Ching, in which Laozi writes, "The three produced all things." Now, we read chapter 42 when we were reading some of those Enneads. That was in the 6th Ennead. The three produced all things. Commenting on this passage, Jiming Xian says that the three represents, quote, the reconciliation of opposites, which is not far from St. Gregory Nazianzen's explanation of the meaning of the triad. Quote, "The triad contains itself in perfection, for it is the first which surpasses the composition of the dyad," unquote. Jiming Xian further stated that, quote, "The three is the principle of order," unquote, and thus that it is that it, quote, "produces all things," unquote. Here it can be seen that Laozi, although he was not given to know the full meaning of the triad, nevertheless realized it to be a creative principle. That's good stuff. Okay, so now there's one I want to read. The Christ of Laozi. This is on page 263, or anybody's following. To the Christ of Laozi. It is strange yet incontrovertible fact that when God did take flesh, he in many ways, though certainly not all, revealed himself to be closer in spirit to the Tao of Laozi than to God as conceived by the Hebrews at the time, even though the Hebrews had the revelation of Moses. This might be difficult to accept by those who are accustomed to thinking of Christ as the fulfillment, expectation specifically of the Hebrews. Ancient Christian tradition, however, holds that Christ satisfied the longings of all nations, of all theologies. Since they viewed God as dwelling in solitude, the Hebrew religious leaders of Christ's time had come to regard him as an inexorable cosmic judge. He was the supreme authority who had to set up a system of law and punish offenders out of the personal indignation. His justice was exact. For the religious leaders then, the law was everything and had to be followed to the letter. This idea led to in latter centuries to an endless codification and interpretation of religious laws. When the Tao became flesh, he did not at all resemble this idea of God. He was, as Laozi had said of him, like water, which greatly benefits all things but does not compete with them, dwelling in lowly places that all disdain. Archimandrite Sophoni writes, quote, "He came in utter meekness, the poorest of the poor, with nowhere to lay his head. He had no authority, neither in the state nor even in the synagogue. Founded on revelation from on high, he did not fight those who spurned him, and it has been given to us to identify him as the Pantocrator, the all-powerful, precisely because he made himself of no reputation and took upon him the form of a servant, submitting finally to duress and execution. As the creator of and true master of all that exists, he had no need of force, no need to display the power to punish his opposition. Christ said of himself, quote, "The kings of the Gentiles exercise lordship over them, but I am among you as he who serves," unquote. Likewise, Laozi had written of him before his coming, quote, "The great Tao clothes and feeds all things, yet does not claim them as his own. All things return to it, yet it claims no leadership over them." The ancient Hebrews knew that their Messiah would come in the form of a man. When he did come, the common people heard him gladly and said, "No man ever spoke like this man," unquote. Others, however, especially among the leaders, rejected him because he did not fit their preconceived image of him. In spite of the testimony of the prophet Isaiah, who foretold that the Messiah would not so much as, quote, break a bruised reed, unquote, they expected him to be a worldly authority figure who would raise an army and mercilessly rout their Roman oppressors. On the contrary, they saw that Christ was, in his own words, meek and lowly in heart. Of him, Laozi had prophesied, quote, the Tao does not show greatness, and it is therefore truly great. It does not contend, and yet it always overcomes. For the Son of Man, said Christ of himself, it is not come to destroy men's lives, but to save them. Unlike the Hebrews, Laozi did not live in expectation of a Messiah. And yet, as Father Seraphim Rose believed, he would have followed Christ if he had seen him, for he would have recognized in him the humble Tao, which had intuited in purity of mind. And so now the next one I want to read is Christ's revelation of the Triad. This is actually the next one. We're on 265. In revealing in his person the selflessness of the absolute Christ, opened to mankind the, quote, secret behind it, the mystery of the Triad. If God had revealed himself to Moses not only as I am, but as the I am three in one, this would have meant nothing to Moses and his people. Only God himself could contain the fullness of this mystery. Therefore, only God himself could bring the knowledge of it to mankind. By walking among us in the likeness of our flesh, he revealed the triadic one not as a verbal or written formula, but as a living personal reality, due to the awesomeness of the mystery. However, he did this only gradually. The acquisition of knowledge of God is a slow process, explains Father Sophrony, not to be achieved in all of its plenitude from the onset, though God is always and in his every manifestation invariably one and indivisible. Christ used simple language intelligible to the most ignorant, but what he said was above their heads, even the wisest of his listeners. Before Abraham was, I am. I and my Father are one. My Father will love him, and he will come unto him and make our abode with him. I will pray the Father, and he shall give you another comforter, and he may abide with you forever. So now a third person is introduced, the Spirit of truth, who proceeds from the Father. He shall testify of me. We note that Christ only gradually began to speak of the Father, and it was not until towards the end of his earthly life that he spoke of the Holy Spirit. Right at the end, the disciples failed to understand him, and he made no attempt to explain to them the image of divine being. I have yet many things to say unto you, but you cannot bear them now. Instead, he indicated how we must attain perfect knowledge. If you continue in my word, you shall know the truth. The Holy Spirit shall teach you all things and bring you to the remembrance of all things that I said unto you. When he, the Spirit of truth, has come, he will guide you into all truth. All right. So now here we're going to flip to personal communion. Actually, what was here? So here's this is page 333. Page 333, and we're just going to read the section 30 there. Personal communion. Laozi, it may be said, had a relationship with this absolute being even before he revealed himself to the world in Jesus Christ. Because of his spirit of humble yearning, Laozi was given to intuit the presence of the Tao as he sat at attention. He heard the Tao's silent voice, but he did not know who it was that spoke. I do not know its name, he said. The way, the Tao, is the by-name that we give it. Now, with the coming of the Tao in the flesh, we do know who it is that speaks in our spirit. We beheld his glory, says the Apostle John, quote, the glory as of the only begotten of the Father, unquote. Thus our relationship with him, even as we sit silently and watch, becomes a personal one. It pauses it passes into communion. Earlier, we defined prayer as personal communion with the Tao. Prayer to the Tao is made possible with Christ. Now that we know the Tao as a person, the watchfulness that Laozi practice can itself be a form of prayer, a silent, humble yearning for Him, whom we know. Further, we are able to do what Laozi was not. We can directly invoke the Tao. That is what St. John Climacus meant when he said, quote, "When the watchman grows weary, he stands up and prays," unquote. In the Filiocalia, St. Hesychius identifies the different kinds of watchfulness that can be practiced by followers of the incarnate Tao. Quote, "I shall now tell you," he says, "in plain, straightforward language, what I consider to be the types of watchfulness which gradually cleanse the spirit from impassioned thoughts. In these times of spiritual warfare, I have no wish to conceal beneath words whatever in this treatise may be of use, especially to more simple people. One type of watchfulness consists in closely observing every mental image or provocation, for only by means of a mental image can Satan fabricate an evil thought and insinuate this into the spirit in order to lead it astray. A second type of watchfulness consists in freeing the heart from all thoughts, keeping it profoundly silent and still, and in praying. A third type consists in continually and humbly calling upon the Lord Jesus Christ for help. We have already described the first of these in detail. The others, which entail prayer to the Tao, will be discussed in the pages that follow. All right. Okay. Let's see. Okay, we are now moving to the next one being page 368. We're going to read Laozi and Christ on the center. Actually, I think we should read the one right before that on finding and living from one center. Let's read that, and then we'll read on Laozi and Christ on praying from the center. So, okay. Guys, smash that like. I appreciate anybody who's still here. I'll be getting to all the super chats here in just a few. But we are on page 366, and we're reading a section 51, titled Finding and Living from One's Center. Okay? It is only when the mind and heart are united in watchfulness and prayer that we can find our spiritual center, what Archimandrite Sophrony calls our deep and metaphysical heart. Our center cannot be adequately described in words. We experience it as a mysterious union of mind and heart. But at the same time, it is neither the physical brain nor the actual heart. Although united to flesh, it is not in itself fleshly. Although not fleshly, it is not wholly immaterial either. For only God is such. It is like an inner temple, and uncircumscribed, with no walls, whose holy of holies is the region of the heart. Quote, "Strive to enter the temple within yourself," says St. Isaac the Syrian, quote, "and you will see the heavenly temple," unquote. St. Theophan speaks of how this center is actually formed in us through grace. In a letter to his spiritual daughter, he writes, quote, "Inner regulation begins only when you choose the side of grace, and make the ways of life in the spirit of grace the inviolable rule of your life. From that moment, as the decision is forming inside you, a center will also form within you, a powerful center, which will begin more and more forcefully to draw you towards itself. In this center will be grace, which has taken hold of your consciousness and free will, or your consciousness and free will combined with grace. This is the same thing which was previously called the resurrection or restoration of the spirit. Then the grace of God will begin to draw toward the center of all the other forces of your nature, both intellectual and spiritual, and govern the entire action, retaining within them that which is good and destroying that which is bad. This drawing of everything to one center and directing of all to one goal is the inner rebirth you have so fervently desired. Once this rebirth has been accomplished, then everything, both great and small, will proceed from this one center, and within you will be established the most perfect harmony, and the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will overshadow the inner temple of your own nature." Unquote. Finding and living from our center is the same as finding and living from our spirit. When we are living from our center, we are no longer reacting to outside pressures or temptations. Not reacting to pressures, we are free from the thoughts, emotions, and desires that these reactions engender. We are internally rather than externally motivated, and thus we do not have to be continuously filling ourselves with that which is outside of us, attention from other people, material things, etc. Living from our spirit, we see ourselves in people and things around us as they really are. Quote, "gathered one," unquote. The gathered one, says St. Theophan, quote, "sees everything within himself. Someone in the center of a circle sees what is along every radius. He sees everything around him almost at the same time. While one steps out of the center, he sees only that which is along one radius. It is the same for the one who is gathered within. He sees all the movements of his powers and is able to govern them," unquote. When we enter into our center, our spirit enters within itself, as it were. This is not self-absorption. However, since the spirit, wherein separation from outside impressions, will naturally seek out what is above and beyond itself, its creator. Engaged in noetic prayer, it will hold wordless conversations with the Word who made it. Okay, now we move to Laozi and Christ on the center. Personal communication with Christ is our spiritual center. To refer to our earlier analogy, the taking of flesh of Laozi's intuitive observation of the Tao in the same center. Laozi referred to man's spiritual center as the middle or the belly, Fu, which Jiming Xian translates as inner things, and Chinese commentator Liu Qi interprets as inner spaciousness. In chapter 12 of the Tao Te Ching, we read, quote, "The sage regards not the eye, viewing and living from externals, but the belly, quote, finding and living from one's center. Therefore, he puts aside the one and takes the other." So we see there, again, what I just read was a section of the original Tao Te Ching, not the Christ, the Eternal Tao. And we see Laozi advocating for living from your belly, from your center. Interestingly, Christ used the same metaphor when speaking of man's spiritual center. Quote, "He that believes in me, as the scripture has said, out of his belly shall flow rivers of living water." Unquote. Here, Christ not only spoke of the same reality of Laozi had alluded to 5 centuries before, but he also revealed a new reality that his followers were to experience. For, quote, "the living water that was to flow out of their center was the grace of the Holy Spirit." The gospel passage continues, quote, "This he spoke concerning the Spirit, whom those who believe in him would receive, for the Holy Spirit was not yet given because Jesus was not yet glorified," unquote. When Christ sent down the grace of the Holy Spirit on his disciples after his resurrection, this grace no longer acted upon followers of the Tao, of the Logos, from the outside, as it had been in the past, but now it could fill and flow out from their very center, their spiritual belly, or their deep heart. To this subject, we will return later. Okay, so now we move into a section on praying from one's center, and I'm going to flip forward to, this one's on the birth of the Logos. The abyss of humility. That's what we'll do that one. Having cut itself away from visible things and having even become totally unknown even to his soul and his senses, the spirit and the follower of the Tao becomes, in the words of St. Basil, quote, forgetful of his own nature, unquote. Having been lowered to the abyss of humility and thus become like the Tao and like the Logos himself, it begins to see things as God sees them and begins to overflow with love for all creation. Humility, writes St. Nicetas Sithatos, quote, is the greatest of the virtues. If, as a result of sincere repentance, it is implanted in you, you will also be given the gift of prayer and self-control and will be freed from servitude to the passions. Peace will suffuse your powers. Tears will cleanse your heart. And through the abiding presence of the Holy Spirit, you will be filled with tranquility. When you have attained this state, your consciousness of the knowledge of God will grow lucid, and you will begin to contemplate the mysteries of the kingdom of heaven and the inner essences of created things. The more you descend into the depths of the Spirit, the more you plumb the abyss of humility. Correspondingly, you gain greater knowledge of your own limitations and recognize the weakness of human character. At the same time, your love for God and your fellow beings waxes until you think that sanctification flows simply from a greeting or from the proximity of those whom you live. Unquote. Quote, once you have achieved this lofty state, you cannot be constrained by sensory attachment to things. You are not distracted by any of the delectations of this life, nor do you regard some people as holy and others as unholy. But just as God makes the rain fall and the sunshine equally on the just and the unjust, on the evil and on the good, so you irradiate love and diffuse its rays to all people. Pregnant through you are with love for everything, yet your heart feels no distress, or rather you are distressed and straightened because you cannot help others as much as you wish you could. You are distressed and strained because you cannot help others as much as you wish you could. As from Eden, from you follows another spring of compunction, divided into the four streams of humility, chastity, dispassion, and undistracted prayer, and it waters the face of God's entire spiritual creation. Now we're going to read a short one called The Birth of the Logos. When man's spirit reaches the supreme point of abasement, God at last sees fit to make his dwelling place there. The Apostle Paul calls this having Christ formed in us, Galatians 4:19. St. Nicetas calls it the birth of Christ, or the birth of the Logos within us. He writes, quote, once Christ the bridegroom has led the soul into the sanctuary of his hidden mysteries, he will initiate it with wisdom into the contemplation of the inner essences of created things. Then, while standing outside of all things, you will dwell within all things and know the origins and ends, for you will have attained a spiritual union with the Father through the Logos and will have been perfected in the Spirit. It is the Tao, it is the Logos who leads us to the Father, the mind of God. Man's spirit, writes Nicetas, quote, consorts with Christ, the Logos rising with him from the earth to heaven and reigning with him in the kingdom of God the Father, all its desires quenched. The Tao and the Logos comes and abides in us just as the Father's divine essence abides in him. About his followers, Christ prayed to the Father, quote, that they may be one, even as we are one. I in them, and you in me, that they may be made perfect in one. I have declared unto them your name, and you will declare it, that the love within which you have loved me may be in them, and I in them. All right. Next one. We're almost through here, guys. Thank you all for being here so much. I truly appreciate it. Next one is Total Illumination. I want to read Total Illumination. This is on page 395 if you have this book. When the light of the Tao and the Logos comes upon a person, that person's spirit may not only behold it in a vision, the spirit, having completely emptied itself and forgotten itself, may be actually infused with the light. While retaining its own created light, it is filled with the uncreated light to such an extent that it in some sense actually becomes it. Saint Simeon writes of this, speaking of himself in the third person, quote, "One day, as he stood and recited, 'God have mercy on me, a sinner,' uttering it with his mind rather than his mouth, suddenly a flood of divine radiance appeared from above and filled all the room. He was wholly in the presence of an immaterial light and seemed to himself to have turned into light. This light," says Father Sophrony, quote, "penetrates us with the power of God, and we become without beginning, nor through our origin, but by the gift of grace. Life without beginning is communicated to us, and there is no limit to the outpouring of the Father's love. Man becomes identical with God, the same by content, not by primordial self-being. God will eternally be good. God will eternally be God for reasonable being. In participating to such an extent in the light of the divinity, man himself becomes a God not by essence or nature, but by grace and adoption. This, the state of deification and divinization, is the closest union of the Tao and the Logos that man can attain. It is this final end of man, deifications," writes St. Maximus the Confessor, is in hypostatic and direct illumination, which has no beginning, but appears in those worthy of something exceeding their comprehension. It is indeed a mystical union with God, beyond mind and reason, in the age when creatures will no longer know corruption. The divine essence can never be beheld, known, or directly experienced by man. What man experiences of God when he is filled with divine light is not God's essence, but his uncreated energies. Christ, the incarnate Tao, the incarnate Logos, have the divine essence within him. Thus, he is God by nature, and he is the Son of God by divine begetting from the Father's essence. Man, on the other hand, does not contain his essence within himself, yet he can participate in God through his energies. Hence, he is a God by grace, and is a son of God, not through birth, but through adoption. And then the last section that I want to read to you guys is right here, and this is on... this is just a little section on the current state of the Orthodox Church in China. So one of the things that I thought was so interesting looking at this is, I told you that Orthodoxy, Christianity really doesn't have a presence in China right now. To some degree, people talk about the underground, and Orthodox Christianity is essentially underground right now in China, because the Communist Party wants basically control of all the religions. And so even Taoism is not highly practiced in China anymore. Now, there is like a Taoist Association of China or something like that. But again, it's controlled by the Communist Party. So only in Taiwan, which again, for those of you who know, Taiwan, when there was the Cultural Revolution, you had the Maoists in the north, you had the nationalists in the south. So the communists were in the north fighting the nationalists in the south. That's Chiang Kai-shek, Sun Yat-sen. And so they were nationalists. They were Cantonese. They were not speaking Mandarin. Eventually they lost and they all fled to the island of Taiwan. I'm sure most of you guys know that. So in Taiwan, you have, that is the lineage of the nationalist Southern Chinese that had to flee the mainland. They left for Taiwan. And so in Taiwan is still practiced religious Taoism to a very significant extent. Within mainland China, the remnants of Taoism is all over the place. You can't, this is thousands of years old. It's clearly in the culture. Confucianism, Taoism, Buddhism. But to think this is like a national religion, like if you went to Saudi Arabia or Iran, not even close. But there, at the back of this book, in the appendix, they have a section on Eastern Orthodoxy in China. And I wanted to just read for you the current state of the church. So Until the communists gained control in China in 1949, such cities as Beijing, Harbin, Shanghai were centers for Russian refugees from the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917. So isn't it so interesting that Orthodox Christianity, our biggest enemy, at least within the last few centuries, has absolutely been communism. So in another part, reading in here, I forget where it was, but it was talking about the Romanians, how they were persecuted under communists and like did their Orthodoxy underground. The Russians had to flee Bolshevik Russia, and they found safety in these major cities within China. But when the Maoists came into power, they made sure that these people were no longer safe. So it's ironic that these large cities had all these Russians and Orthodox Christians, and then obviously with the, we'll read, but obviously that all ended. From 1943 to 1949, there lived in Shanghai one of the greatest Orthodox saints of the 20th century, the miracle worker Archbishop John Maximovich. He established an orphanage for both Russian and Chinese children whom he rescued from poverty, neglect, and abandonment. Even the non-Christian Chinese venerated him as a holy man. Also in China were the clairvoyant abbesses Rufina, the miracle worker Bishop Jonah of Hilar, and the holy elder Ignatius of Harbin, a great man of prayer who after the Bolshevik Revolution prophesied what began in Russia will end in America. And we see it already happening. In 1950, a year after Archbishop John left China, a righteous native Chinese priest, Simeon Du, was consecrated as the new bishop of Shanghai. In 1957, another native Chinese, Basil Yao Fuyan, was made bishop of Beijing, and the Chinese Orthodox Church was proclaimed completely autonomous, self-governing by the Orthodox Church in Russia. At that time, there were 25,000 believers in the Chinese Orthodox Church. By 1964, the Cultural Revolution that began by Mao Zedong, churches were closed and destroyed, and Bishop Simeon Du was martyred. Since that time, Chinese Orthodox believers have for the most part gone underground, and their large cathedral in Shanghai, though still in good condition, is now used as a bank. And this is the church that he's referring to. You can see that. That's the church, the Orthodox Church in Shanghai he's referring to. That is now a bank. So this concludes Christ the Eternal Tao. Now, there is so much more wisdom. There's so much more you guys could read in here. This is just a snippet. Like, I only have so much time. And so, no, shout out to Anthony DeSanto for today's stream. Now, I would like to maybe just read one of these. I don't want to spend too much time now that it's just so late. We're almost going on 3 hours, and maybe rehashing some of this stuff would be worthy of a stream. I'm not sure, but I'll just read one of these sutras. I'll read one sutra, and so what I'm going to read to you is this. The third liturgical sutra, the Sutra of Returning to Your Original Nature. And what is the most beautiful of the Jesus Sutras, the Sutras of Returning to Your Original Nature, we are taken by step through a salvationary journey to freedom from karma, past lives, and rebirth, and an infusion of uniquely Christian imagery, Taoist teachings, and Buddhist philosophy. Jing weaves a masterful narrative. This sutra and one that follows is dated to around 780 to 790, both in a private collection in Japan. The start of the sutra has been lost except for a few words, but after a few damaged lines, we enter the text modeled by the classic Buddhist sutra style of Buddha in discourse with his followers. Okay, so let's just read the sutra. I just want to read chapter 1 to you guys. So you can get a feel for it. But this is, again, the book, the Jesus Sutras, and this is a blending of Nestorian Christianity as it entered into China during the 7th century. 635, Alopen, an Assyrian Christian missionary, made his way to Chang'an, the capital of the Tang Dynasty, in 635, and was the first Christian missionary. Now, he made his way through the Silk Road, obviously, but the Tang Dynasty really liked Christianity, and they called it the religion of light, Da Qing. And they gave them their own pagoda over in Chang'an. And so within the Da Qing pagoda, the pagoda of light, right, the religion of light, is all this ancient Chinese Christian stuff. Now, a lot of it was destroyed. One of the interesting things, if you read this book, that one of the reasons why the Tang, which were Taoist, like the Chinese or like the Christians so much, is they thought they loved the theology. A lot of similarities they felt. They loved that the Christians that came were willing to, if the emperor would give them safe harbor there in China and places to live, and in turn they would fight and defend the Tang dynasty from invaders from the north, which they did. And then they also spoke out against slavery. So during this time, Buddhism was building tons of monasteries. And the Tang dynasty actually found out that some of the Buddhist monasteries were becoming really wealthy and accused them of sort of like poor, I don't want to call it banking, but, financial delegation, that they were sort of laundering money in certain things. And the Buddhists were using slaves to build some of their monasteries and temples there in China. So eventually the Tangs fall apart and Buddhism becomes a very popular religion after this whole period. And so that's where you see this whole breakdown of Christianity within Chinese history, and it's really not that significant. Now, this is just chapter 1 of this particular sutra. Again, the Sutra of Returning to Your Original Nature. Obviously, we can already see the inclination of the Taoist sentiments, because returning to your original nature, as I said, was that, what was that? The Ziran? I forget the Chinese term. Let me see real quick. The primordial state, Ziran. That's exactly it. So we can already see this idea of getting back to your primordial state in the sutra. I'm just going to read chapter 1. I've read too much. We're almost on 3 hours, so here we go. A transcript of the teachings given when the Eternal One, Jesus, taught in the great preaching place of purity and clarity, addressing all who had escaped from the realm of desire. To his left and right and all around him, people sat listening with deep reverence. They wanted to hear the words that would save them. Okay. Simon spoke up and said, "We didn't know the truth, and we need salvation." And the Messiah replied, "So good. Everything that exists needs the true law. And every kind of person can find what's just below the surface, buried deeper than our eyes. The truth is like looking at the white of the moon in water. If the water is cloudy, you can't see it clearly. It's like burning straw in a fire. If the straw is wet, the fire can't burn brightly. Spiritual life can be hidden and dampened like this. So Simon, if anyone wants to follow the way of triumph, they must clear their minds and set aside all wanting and doing. To be pure and still means to be open to purity and stillness. As a result, you can intuit the truth. This means that the light can shine, revealing the workings of cause and effect, and leading to the place of peace and happiness. Simon, know this: I carry myself in strangeness, in words that you can reach out north, south, east, and west. And if I am everywhere in the world, then I don't know how I am. If I am truly in my words, then I don't know what I signify. If a person has a made-up name, no one really knows who he is. Trying to know and to see are irrelevant. Why is this? People struggle trying to figure it all out. This struggle creates the desire to do something. Doing creates movement, which creates anxiety. Then it is impossible to find rest and contentment. This is why I teach no wanting and doing without doing. It stops you thinking about things which disturb you. Then you can enter into the source of pure empty being. Detach yourself from that which disturbs and distracts you, and be as pure as the one who breathes in purity and emptiness. This state is the gateway to enlightenment. It is this way to peace and happiness. All right, guys, that is going to conclude this member stream. Again, a major thank you and shout out to Anthony DeSanto. Thank you, brother, for sponsoring tonight's stream. I'm now going to dive into some of these super chats. God bless you all. Let's see. First super chat comes from Harry Serpanos. Shout out to Harry Serpanos. Throws in $10 and says, keep up God's work. Well, thank you so much, Harry Serpanos. I really appreciate it, brother. Thank you for being here and supporting the stream. I appreciate it. God bless you and the family. Next super chat comes from Dean Lim 2. Dean Lim 2 throws in $10 and says, a donation from the heart. Well, thank you so much, Dean Lim 2. I really appreciate it from the heart. Thank you very, very much, Dean Lim. God bless you as well. I think that's a first time super chatter. I've never seen that name before. So thank you very, very much. Next one comes from the continual supporter of the stream, Genghis Khan. Thank you so much, Genghis Khan. You have been very generous to me and a continual supporter of the work and streams that I do. Thank you very, very much, Genghis Khan. Dean Lim 2 throws in another super chat, a donation from the heart. He put in 2 donations from the heart, one on Streamlabs, the other on YouTube. Shout out to Dean Lim 2. Thank you very, very much, brother. Throws in $4.99, says a donation from the heart. Well, thank you. Next super chat comes from Pim Orsos. Oh, shout out to Pim Orsos, one of our good brothers here in the community. Major supporter of Church of the Eternal Logos. He purchased the Khazarian stream and the what was the other stream that you purchased? You did 2 of them. Hold on, let me see. That's gonna bother me. I just did it. What was it? Was it Hebrew Roots? Maybe. Was the Hebrew Roots the last sponsored stream I did? Maybe. I think so. Well, yeah. Pim Orsov has anyways, he sponsored 2 of our streams here, and so major shout out to him. Really, really appreciate all the support. Pim, God bless you, man. Thank you very, very much. I truly do appreciate it. Let's see. Yeah. So, anyways, Pim Orsos, thank you so much, brother. Throws in $10 super chat. Man, thank you very, very much. You've been a continual supporter. I really appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you, brother. Very, very generous. You've been very, very generous. Next, super chat comes from Orthodox Imperium Rising. Throws in $50 and no comment. Thank you so much, Orthodox Imperium Rising. Thank you very, very much. Really appreciate that. Generous super chat. Orthodox Imperium Rising throws in $50, no content. Thank you very, very much, Orthodox Imperium Rising. God bless you and the family. Next super chat comes from, again, Genghis Khan. Throws in $9.99. God bless Father Deacon. Well, God bless Father Deacon. Absolutely. God bless Patristic Faith, and God bless all the work he's doing. Thank you, Genghis Khan, again, for all the support. You have been so supportive of everything I do. Thank you very, very much, man. I really, really appreciate it. Next super chat comes from Frankie D. Shout out to Frankie D. God bless you and the family, man. I hope you're doing well. Throws in $5 and says, hey, bro, where are the Twizzlers? Shout out to my bro, Austin. Hope he is watching. Well, shout out to Austin. And where are the Twizzlers? I'm not sure, Frankie D, what that means, but where are the Twizzlers? I'm not sure. But shout out to your buddy, Austin. Don't know if he's watching or not, but thank you so much, Frankie D. Another good Orthodox brother. Met him in Montana. God bless you, bro. I hope you're doing well. Next super chat comes from Greg. Throws in $4.99, no comment. Well, thank you so much, Greg. God bless you, man. I really appreciate it. Next super chat comes from David Franco Jr. David Franco Jr., you are another longtime supporter of the stream. Thank you very much, bro. Throws in $10 and says, 1, I missed most of the stream. I will rewind it. I was looking forward to this one. You should check out a video by a guy named Luke Smith about Stoic religion. I've been seeing the concept of the Logos Tao everywhere. Christians were called followers of the way. Both Stoicism and Taoism were discovered in a similar age. Christ preparing the Gentiles for his incarnation. They both recognize that we must bear our cross and follow the Logos. I even see atheists recognize the tuning of the universe. All right. Well, Look, that was a two-part super chat by two different people. One's from David Franco Jr. for $10, part one of that. Part two is from Frankie D. So thank you guys both very, very much. There's Austin Robinson. Shout out to Frankie D. Everybody give Austin Robinson a thumbs up. Austin Robinson, God bless you, bro. Glad that you're here. Shout out to Frankie D, man. That's great that you finished David Franco Jr.'s super chat. So again, I'll read that whole thing. Number one, I missed most of the stream. I'll rewind it. I was looking forward to this one. You should check out a video by a guy named Luke Smith. Okay, I'm not familiar with him by name Luke Smith on about Stoic religion. Okay. All right. I'll check it out. I'll see what it's all about. I've been seeing the concept of Logos/Tao everywhere. Christians were called followers of the way. Both Stoicism and Taoism were discovered in a similar age. Christ preparing the Gentiles for his incarnation. They both recognize that we must bear our cross and follow the Logos. I even see atheists recognize the tuning of the universe. Yeah, I think I could do a stream on Stoicism. I don't think I've done a full stream on Stoicism. Maybe that'd be a good one. I think that would be. I got the meditations from Marcus Aurelius over here. Maybe I could do one on an introduction to Stoicism and read some of the meditations. That might be a good one. So thank you so much, David Franco Jr. and Frankie D. Or maybe David Franco maybe is Frankie D's full name. Now it's starting to make sense here. So thank you so much, Frankie D. God bless you, bro. Zach Flatten throws in $5 and says, one of the first ortho books that I read back when I was a catechumen. Very dense stuff. I have to read it again at some point so that I properly retain it all. Certainly an aid for truth seekers. Absolutely. And Zach Flatten, thank you so much for the $5 super chat, brother. I really appreciate that. Yeah, so thank you so much, Zach Flayton. I really appreciate the super chat. Thank you very much. Next one comes from Simon the Amputee for $9.99 and says, another excellent stream, brother. Well, thank you so much, Simon. God bless you, bro. Shout out to Simon the Amputee. Guys, do you follow his social media? Go follow Simon the Amputee over on Instagram. Dude is freaking climbing mountains. Like, his latest thing, he freaking climbed a mountain, and I was inspired by it. So Simon the Amputee inspires me. So I love what he's doing, man. The grit, the fight. God bless you, bro. It's an absolute pleasure to meet you in SoCal. God bless Simon the Amputee and what he does. God bless you, man. So it says another excellent stream, brother. Well, thank you, Simon, and God bless you, man, and keep doing what you do. So Nas066 throws in 777 and says, God bless you. Well, God bless you, Nas066. I think you're a first-time super chat. I've never seen that name. So thank you very, very much, man, for the $7.77. I appreciate it. And Casey Bear throws in $5 and says, one of my favorite streams so far. So fascinating, I'll probably rewatch. Well, I mean, that works as well, but I'm glad that you liked it. That's the whole point of these streams. And again, shout out to Anthony DeSanto for today's topic. So I hope that it's useful in one way or another, and at least gives an appreciation and shows it shows how Christianity can transcend and even has many parallels with Taoism. Not saying that they're equal, but obviously that our tradition is the full fulfillment. And so thank you so much, Casey Bear, for that. Really appreciate it. Shout out to Nas066. Really appreciate it, guys. And then Frankie D throws in another super chat, $5 super chat, and says, forgot to change my name in the title, secret identity revealed. Now we all know. We all know now. So Frankie D is David Franco Jr. Okay, now I get it. Well, thank you so much, Frankie D, thank you so much, brother, for your support. You've been a continual supporter, longtime supporter. Shout out to Austin. It was great to meet you over at Montanica as well. I believe Austin was one of the guys with you. I'm sure it's probably the same guy. I'm not positive. But thank you so much, Frankie D. God bless you, man. Really appreciate it. Really appreciate it. And then it looks like the final super chat comes from Weewoo. 499 says, when the Tao Te Ching says eternal Tao cannot be named, I think it refers to the essence of God. When the Tao Te Ching says the eternal Tao cannot be named, yes, it is referring to the essence of God. That's exactly what it is referring to. So you nailed that, Weewoo. In fact, I think in parts of that opening, the first Ennead, when we read the first Ennead, I think there was one of those chapters actually one of those opening chapters actually referenced the sort of essence, right? How the essence, the Tao, the essence that can be named isn't the true essence of the primal essence. So I think one of those chapters, I can't remember, I'd have to go back, but it's hitting at exactly what you're speaking about, Weewoo. So yeah, you nailed it, bro. When the Tao Te Ching says eternal Tao cannot be named, I think it refers to the essence of God. And I agree with you. I believe that it is. So yeah, thank you so much. Weewoo, and shout out to all the super chatters. Oh, looks like we got another one over here by Jonathan Dumire. Jonathan Dumire throws in a super chat and says, let's see. Jonathan Dumire says, are you able to add any additional comments regarding the use of the I Ching or astrology as means of according with Christ the eternal Tao? I would say that, interesting question. So Jonathan Dumire is asking, are you able to add any additional comments regarding the use of the I Ching or astrology as means of according with Christ the eternal Tao? I would say that one of the reasons why I focused on the sort of theological and philosophical connections between Taoism and Orthodoxy was because obviously Taoism has a lot of practices that we probably wouldn't support in regards to divinizing practices. So divinization, I have a whole book over here. I took a class on Chinese divinization, and whether it be turtle shells or sticks or animal bones or whatever it is, long ancient shamanic history in China regarding divinization. Is divinization in some way leading towards self-divinization or pointing towards theosis? I would argue that. Would a Taoist that's still practicing some type of astrological or divinizing practice, would they argue that? Probably not. Astrology, generally speaking, and for some of these Taoists believe that they could sort of find out the fate of one's soul, find out, because for them, Tian heaven, the sort of cosmic will can be deciphered, for some people believe, through the stars, through astrology. Do we as Christians believe that we can decipher the will of God through the stars? No, absolutely not. So in regards to your question, the use of the I Ching or astrology as means for, the I Ching is the book of changes. The I Ching, it's hard. We only have half the I Ching. I have the I Ching over here. It's like this freaking thick, and it's only half. Like the second half, the I Ching we don't even have. It's been lost to history. But the I Ching, it's been a fascinating book for people who are looking for a sort of cosmic mystery. So like Terence McKenna, for example, believed that the mushroom spoke to him and gave him a pattern of like the the three lines, the different variations of the three lines within the I forget what they're called, not hexagrams. There's a name for them. If you look at the I Ching and Chinese divinization, how they're different, they're organized. And so he believed that the mushroom told him that the I Ching was a book that mapped time itself. Now, were the Chinese trying to do this? Yeah, they were trying to map time itself because they believed time was eternal and it was ever changing. And so if you could map it, you could map and know ahead of time what the changes were going to occur. I would say that worldview is leading us a little bit further away from even the stuff that Laozi is speaking about. That's why this focuses more on the Tao Te Ching, because the schools of Taoism vary, right? This book's not talking about the Zhuangzi, and it's not talking about the I Ching, a divinatory text. It's talking about the Tao Te Ching, of which those other texts are then built off of the general principles of the Tao Te Ching. So were the Chinese interested in mapping the changes of time itself, the contours, like time being a sort of a map, and sort of the I Ching being the cartography of time itself? That was their goal. Did it happen? I don't believe so. Terence McKenna, according to the Mushroom, believed it did. So, in regards to Christ the Eternal Tao, I'm not sure how it relates, because the focus on this book, at least, is on the teachings of Laozi. Now, some don't even believe Laozi historically existed. That is a debated topic among scholars, whether Laozi actually existed or not. I don't know. I've actually never looked into that case to look at the arguments to or for or against. But that's why this book itself, Christ the Eternal Tao, focuses on not the I Ching, which is a divinatory, which really sort of steps into a paradigm that's not exactly the paradigm that we're trying to lay out regarding Taoism. And so I would say it may have some overlap, but I don't see astrology or the I Ching, generally speaking, being an important part of the general principles put forth by Christ the Eternal Tao, by Higher Monk Damascene, or by Father Seraphim Rose and their understanding of the relationship between Tao and Logos. So I hope that was probably useful. Jonathan Demir, I'm sorry, I don't have a whole lot to say about that topic, but I don't see the I Ching necessarily fitting as well with Logos theology as the Tao Te Ching does, because the I Ching is a map of time and changes, and the Tao Te Ching is a 9 enneads trying to describe what the Tao is in its relationship to creation. So the Tao Te Ching is more philosophical, theological. The I Ching is more of a divinatory text. And so I think it sort of steps into the bounds of a different paradigm somewhat, but consistent with Taoism. But I think the point that we're trying to do in today's stream is take sort of general Tao Te Ching, Taoism, and Laozi and relate that to Logos theology, and not necessarily the later developments that are built upon the Tao Te Ching, like the I Ching. So if that makes sense. So I'll leave it there. But thank you so much, Jonathan Demir, for the $9.99 super chat. And so that's going to conclude tonight's stream. Again, special shout out to Anthony DeSanto for tonight's stream. I hope you appreciate. I hope I did justice to the topic and that you appreciate tonight's stream. Thank you, brother, for sponsoring it. And I need to give a special thank you to all our super chatters tonight. So a special thank you goes out to Harry Serpanos. A special shout out to Dean Lim 2, Genghis Khan, Pim Orsos, Orthodox Imperium Rising, Frankie D, Greg. Shout out to Zach Flayton. Shout out to Simon the Amputee. Go follow him on Instagram and the inspiring life that man is living. God bless that man. Shout out to Nas066. Oh, we got another super chat from Frankie D. Shout out to Casey Bear 7. Shout out to Wee Woo. Shout out to Jonathan Dumir. And then Frankie D throws in another $5 and says, not to keep you, but it seems like science is just repackaged ancient myths. I've never heard of the I Ching, but it sounds like some space-time woo-woo. Thanks to Jay, I learned that evolution is repackaged Hindu myth. Yeah, I think that when you start to kind of dive down these rabbit holes, Frankie D, that there's kind of like there's not that many options for like that have explanatory power for things. So like, is there a God? Yes or no? Is God personal? Yes or no? Can you directly interact with God? Yes or no? And then it's like all the answers to these questions like slowly fragment and form these different paradigms. And it's like ultimately there's only like so many options you can go down. Again, creation or evolution. Which one is it? And so, yeah, Jay's hitting at, again, these repackaged ancient myths. It's like that's why tradition is the amalgamation, the accumulation of multiple minds trying to think about a topic. That's why you look at ancient myths and it's like the modern minds, the scientific minds thinking about topics came to the same conclusions, are rearticulated with fancy post-Enlightenment terminology, secular science, all this different stuff. But it really is, most of this stuff is all just repackaged one way or another. So I don't disagree. I think you're on it. The I Ching sounds like some space-time woo. Well, I mean, it probably is. For the Chinese, within the context of history itself, Zhongguo, China, that's what that means center, middle world, middle earth, middle, everything revolved around China and the Chinese emperor. That's how, if you were in China, if you were part of these traditions, again, which were in a way culturally isolated until the Silk Road to some degree, their worldview, in a way, they felt like they could sort of figure out the contours of time. I agree with you. I think ultimately it comes from a place of like the will, right? Even Laozi spoke about this in today's book about like unless your will is incongruent with the Tao, it's always going to lead to corruption or with God's will. Look into Chinese history. It's a lot of turmoil, a lot of interesting stuff. So there it is. Prism got it. Zhongguo. That is China in Chinese. And so yeah. So Frankie D, I agree with you. And again, thank you so much, brother, for all the super chats, for all the support. And God bless everybody who's still here. Smash that like. And I'm going to be back potentially either Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday. One of those 3 days I'm going to be back. I may be back on multiple of those days. I'm coming out swinging for this first week. I'm glad that I'm back. I can make content again. And I'm going to make tons of content. So Genghis Khan, Middle Earth, huh? One ring to rule them all. Yeah, I mean, one empire, one power structure. Yeah, it's been a game that has been going on for a long, long, long time. So anyways, guys, thank you so much. Thank you, Frankie D, for all the support, man. God bless you and the family. And again, I will be back Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday, or maybe all 3 days, maybe 2 of those days. Who knows? I got to come up with another topic, but I'll be back soon. So until then, as